Good morning. Welcome to the Education and Children's Social Care Overview and Scrutiny. I'm a little bit croaky, so I'm hoping that my voice will hold up. Before we start these proceedings, may I bring your attention to some housekeeping matters? There's no expected fire alarm testing today. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please follow the fire and emergency procedures that are applicable to the Council House. Can I also ask you use your microphone when addressing the meeting and that it's switched off when you're not using it and your mobile devices are turned to silent. This meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of subsequent repeated viewing. By entering the Warspite room and during the meeting, councillors are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those recordings for webcasting purposes. So we move on to item 1, which is apologies. Over to you, Ross.
Through you, Chair. Apologies been received from Councillor Mrs Pengelly. Councillor Finn was due to be substituting. Councillor Poyser, Councillor Allen and Councillor Tippett is substituting. Councillor Loveridge, Councillor Partridge and Councillor Mrs Beer, who's provided apologies due to a medical family emergency. We've also received some apologies from Councillor Deacon.
Thank you, Ross. So move on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest in respect to the items on the agenda? I always just declare that I'm a governor of a Horizon MAT school. Anybody else? So we move on to item 3, which is minutes. Does anybody have anything to raise on the minutes of the meeting? Councillor Tippett.
Just a really minor point, but it says when listing under who's present, the meeting started at 1300 on the 14th of September and was then adjourned at 12:01. So I don't know how the meeting was adjourned 59 minutes before it started. So I was wondering if that could be corrected.
Thank you.
Noted, Chair.
Councillor Cresswell.
Two things about minutes. One I'd like to raise on just a technical thing is that it might be useful to have, is it possible to have the minutes straight after the meeting? Because it's much easier, especially if you're old like me. I can't remember what happened, last week, let alone like 2 months ago. And secondly, I wanted to ask a very specific thing related to one of the actions, and that's on page 6, BB, about the committee writing to Kelly Tolhurst. Re-response to the Josh McAllister, because that publication, the publication of, it was actually asked in Prime Minister's question time on Wednesday. The publication of that review is not actually likely to happen until next year, I gather, because it was actually specifically asked on Wednesday, and also that also changes as well. I mean, we've had so many Education Secretary of States, and now we've got a new Minister of State for Education, who's Claire Coutinho. So it would actually be a letter going to a different minister anyway. So I wondered if action had happened and whether those other things are possible.
Yeah, the action hasn't been completed yet, although the education one is very nearly there following the autumn statement, so we're linking to that. The education one, we've been slightly otherwise engaged. It will be with you very shortly, but we can link to that. I think it's still important that we make the point that the scrutiny wants to make around sufficiency issues and the challenges in the system.
Oh, whoops. Do you want to come back, Councillor Cresswell?
I just want to raise, I mean, I'm quite aware that there's a very important thing happening at the moment, but it just did occur to me that actually came out at what was a meeting which was in October. And if that hasn't actually been sent out, we're nearly sort of like 2 months down the line. Certainly, if the letter has been drafted, you'll have to change the addressee at the top, because it's now a different secretary, a different junior minister.
Can I ask then that those letters are sent out so that the responses can be received in time for our next scrutiny?
Yeah, I'd be happy. Happy with that. That would be important. Thank you.
there any other issues to raise on the minutes?
Through you, Chair, did you want to just cover off the minutes element? Is that right?
Say that again.
Just Councillor Creswell raised the question about minutes.
Oh, apologies, yes.
So minutes do take a little time to craft, so they are not available immediately after the meeting. We do have a target in place. It's not always met, to be completely honest. Our approach is to try to get the tracking decisions out to you quickly, immediately after the meeting, so you're very clear about what was agreed during that session. We'll do our best to get minutes out earlier, indeed.
Can I ask what the target is, Ross?
Target's 10 working days, Chair, but that target was implemented when we had twice as many staff about 10 years ago.
Mr. Harrison?
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate, it's really difficult, especially when you're going back and then thinking, actually, what has been covered, what hasn't been covered, and you're trying to think, okay, has everything been covered? So even just a list that says this has been action, this isn't action, so you can go back, because like Councillor Creswell, you get to the point where you're thinking, I don't know what now is missing and what isn't missing. So just a little bit, because the packs come out quite near to this meeting, so there's not actually that much time to sort of then gather it back in. But I take your point about capacity.
Thank you. So are we happy to agree the minutes? Thank you, Dylan. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So now we're going to move, we've moved the agenda around slightly because Scarlett from the Youth Cabinet is going to talk to us about the school uniform policy report, and we have changed the agenda to accommodate Scarlett so that she doesn't miss too much school. Just like to say that you're very welcome, Scarlett, and thank you very much for giving your time today. So if you want to present the report, and then if you're happy to take a few questions.
I'm Scarlett, I'm one of the MYPs in Youth Parliament. I was elected in March for my campaign on school uniform policies. I know I get a lot of questions on my campaign about why are you abolishing uniform, why should we change it? But I want to explicitly state now that this campaign is not for abolishing policies. I've never said that. It's for changing them so that people with disabilities or people who are gender non-conforming can feel more comfortable with themselves in their uniform. This report was made by the feedback from young people. There was around 20 young people in Youth Parliament, and we held a focus group where I gave them all reports on policies on different schools, and they were asked questions, which are the questions that you see in the report now, and their feedback was put into it. This report was made because it's an issue that I know a lot of young people want changed in schools, which is why I was elected in the first place. I know a lot of young people have said to me that schools are really strict with their dress codes and that we need to challenge the rules and allow them to have a more relaxed approach, because I know a lot of students will get told off in schools for having, say, trousers that might be more comfortable for them. So my campaign in this report is to show people in power, or just people in general, what they can change with their policies, and to allow more freedom for their uniforms. And it's allowing students from a relaxed approach, and it would improve for a more relaxed approach on the uniforms to allow their mental health to improve in a way, because I know a lot of young people face severe mental health issues, and mental health is the uniform policies are a great contributor to that. So yeah.
Thank you, Scarlett. Are you finished, or do you want to keep going? Thank you very much. It takes a great deal of guts to do that. I think it's very impressive. I don't know, Jenny, if there's anything you wanted to add before we go to questions.
Sorry. It's just so Scott. In Youth Parliament, young people write their own campaigns for what they want to stand on. They choose an issue that's important to them. So Scarlett picks school uniforms. We then we released the information in our elections with all of the young people standing in and what campaign issue they've picked and why they've picked that issue. And then all young people in every secondary school in Plymouth vote for who they would like to be elected. So in Plymouth, we elect 4. We have 2 deputies and 2 MYPs, and Scarlett is an MYP, which so means she's a member of Youth Parliament. And so she represents the young people locally and on a national front as well. So she's was lucky enough to go to the House of Commons and Hull and do Southwest representation to talk about her campaign and gather feedback from other young people across the UK as well as in Plymouth. She did try doing a questionnaire for teachers that went out to teachers in July, but only 24 people responded to that because we discovered teachers were very concerned about what their answers and their responses would be and how that would be implemented at the school. And they were concerned about how Scarlett would take the report and what would come from that. And obviously we don't want to alienate the schools we work quite closely with, but this is an issue that young people in Plymouth voted quite highly. That's how she's got her position as MYP. So therefore we have a duty to tackle this issue, to bring it to the spotlight and to address it with schools, to say that we recommend some changes are made to the school uniform policy. We're not telling them, you know, we're not demanding these changes are made. We're offering recommendations from the report that all of the young people put together, and Scarlett led and actually wrote the report herself based on their feedback and their ideas. So it's just recommendations for how we could make some minor changes to the policies and make young people feel more confident and help raise their self-esteem, but also just, we're not saying everybody needs to throw away school uniforms, but we are concerned about the cost of living crisis, the fact that school uniforms do cost a lot, and we are aware there are places you can go to get help with that. We know that, and Scarlett is also going to be raising awareness of the free school uniform shop. She's designed posters for all schools and that we hope to send out so that every school will sign up and will collect school uniform that they can then donate themselves to this free school uniform shop, because it's a great idea. So we also want to raise awareness of that as part of this as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. And thank you, Scarlett. I think it's a very interesting report, and I think it's the voice of young people in our city telling us something about what they think about uniform. And I think it's important to note nobody's saying get rid of it. It's about making it more comfortable and reminding schools about their responsibility with the new guidance around affordability, etc. So I'm really glad that you did that work and that you've brought it here. So over to questions. Councillor Brysdale.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Councillor Lang's already said. Thank you so much for that report, Scarlett. I've had the pleasure of meeting you on a couple of occasions, and it was really useful in the reception room a couple of months ago to speak to you and other members of Youth Parliament about this uniform campaign. And I just wanted to put on the record that really informed the work that councillors then went on to do. So the motion that we passed at full council very recently, had the messages that you passed on to us really at its heart, and particularly around the cost aspect too. But I think one of the things that's really clear from your report is the importance of having families at the heart of uniform policy reviews, which I think is something that you care passionately about as well. On that note, I was wondering whether it'd be possible for an update on what outcomes have happened from that motion, whether the letter has been sent yet to schools.
So are you directing that to Councillor Carlisle?
Yep, Councillor Carlisle, if possible.
Thank you, Chair. I've just chased that up actually because I'm aware the letter needs to go out quite soon before they sort of break up. It's either that or we try and get them but when they start again in January. So once I've got an update, I'll let you know straight away, Councillor Brysdale, and especially as well with Councillor Cresswell.
Yeah, as before with the letter to government, it'd be really useful if we could so that we could get responses for the next education scrutiny. And schools tend to take quite a few months to look at policy. So if we want them to be informed for the September term date, I think it's really important that that gets out early in the new year.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And when I've been going out on all my school visits, that's one of the first things I ask about is their school uniform policy and how they're doing. I've been really pleased to hear that the majority of the schools have got very good structure of school policy. One of them I went to, Stoke Damrell, actually offers free school shoes. So if they've turned up in incorrect uniform, they get offered that. And they also, when they first start, they all get the exact same pencil case. So they all start with the exact same equipment. And there's another one I went to as well, Knoll Primary, and from preschool onwards, they give them the exact same uniform. So they all start with the same T-shirt, with the same branding. So they haven't had to pay for that.
It's just to say, so the letters will go. We do have, since I've joined, we have an end of term briefing with all head teachers across the city. Forgive me, I can't remember the date, it's in the diary. So I'll make sure it's a 45-minute Teams meeting, breakfast meeting with all head teachers across the city, all faces invited. Really good attendance. We introduced it at the end of October half term. So I can absolutely get it on that agenda and refer to the letter. We will get the letter out. And actually, I think there's no harm. I mean, you'll know this. We can do it before Christmas and do it after Christmas and attach it within the school's bulletin. So I'm more than happy and willing to do that.
Councillor Creswell.
I'd like to say a big thank you to Scarlett, particularly because when we attended the Youth Parliament working sessions, that Charlotte's team on school uniform was so helpful to me, and I found the conversations I had actually really helped to inform that speech that I made in the council chamber. So if you could take that back, not just to you, Scarlett, but also to your team. One of the things you raised, which I think is really worrying, is you're saying about mental health, that school uniform can impact on mental health. And I think we have to bear in mind that schools are places, in fact, where, you know, the priority is for learning, and we want the environment and culture and everything within school to ensure that good learning actually takes place. And it's very worrying if school uniform is having a detrimental impact on mental health, which therefore is going to have a detrimental impact on learning. And the final just observation I wanted to make, and I think you're very much ahead of the game here, Scarlett, you and your team, is that, of course, the current advice in September 2022 from the DfE, which was directive advice about school uniform and about making sure that that non-branded articles were used as much as possible, was also within that advice is how important it is to actually work with parents, and specifically it mentions young people in making decisions about and deciding on school uniform. And I think you're very much ahead, and you're obviously thinking like the government is and statutory bodies about how school uniform should be designed and how those people who are going to wear it should actually have a real proper impact and say in the design and type of school uniform used. Thanks very much, Scarlett.
Do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much. I know a lot of schools are for all schools are for like a good place of learning, and like are meant to be like have sole purpose for learning. But I've spoken to a lot of young people from my school, Stoke Damrell, or from other schools, and they've all said that because of their uniform standards and how strict they are and how strict the teachers are with it, that it's really distracting for them. If like a student's in class and they've got like a nose set in, and the student's being yelled at by their teacher, it's really distracting for them and they can't learn. And it's also like, if they're being yelled at, it's like an impact of like someone's yelling at me. It's kind of like, I don't really know how to explain it. It's like horrible because it's like someone's yelling at you for something that you can't control. For example, like if you do have a disability and you have to wear different clothing, and a teacher doesn't know that, and then it's like and then like you're being yelled at for something you can't control. So it's more like if you're yelling at students for having incorrect uniform and not improving, if you're yelling at students for not having correct uniform and putting them, saying like my school has a recovery, I know it's different for all schools, but it's like isolation basically, that's taking away some of their learning and what they could be learning in that school day. So yeah, thank you.
can I just ask something very quickly, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Cree. So what the question I was going to ask you was around the kind of sanctions around uniform. Have you had any thoughts, you personally or as a team, what schools can do around their kind of enforcement of standards? Because they're going to have a minimum standard, and I know you're saying you feel, and from this this work, it's too strict. But do you have any thoughts about how they can impose a minimum standard without sanctions like recovery or detention or temporary exclusion, etc.?
I always say to all my friends, it's a bit of a joke, but like, if you're going to have these strict ideas for students, why not have the same for teachers? And that kind of means like, why should students be put in recovery for having like nose studs and that if a teacher can wear it? So I think that maybe having a polite conversation with the student, maybe like, say if like a student just got like a piercing done, can't take it out because they'll get an infection. Understand that, get them to put a plaster around it so it's not noticeable. Kind of like subtle things that like teachers can do to like stop like yelling at students and like making them feel really upset about it, or, like putting them in recovery. Because then they still have that learning time where they can learn and like get qualifications without being like told off and missing learning. Thank you.
Councillor Cree?
I just want to say thank you, really, for this work. I think it's really important that we listen to young people because you live in your uniform a lot of the day, and I'm trying to do the calculation in my head, but I think it was about 18 years ago I was involved with a very similar campaign in Plymouth, and it's very sad to me that we are still having this conversation with people and forcing students to live in a uniform that is uncomfortable to them. I mean, 18 years ago, if you don't calculate what that makes me right now, we said that we were feeling unsafe in our uniform in this school in Plymouth, and we weren't listened to, and I think that was one of the defining features in my school education, really, not being listened to. And now, well, I'm here so that people have to listen to me occasionally. So yeah, I think it's sad that we're still having this conversation, but thank you for all your hard work and to making sure that young people are really listened to, and yeah, continue doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Scarlett. Yeah, a really good report, very, very detailed and covering a lot of areas, so well done. And, I just wanted to raise a point about some things that seem to me very logical and practical in terms of the things like, for example, uniform that needs to be worn when it is extremely hot. You know, having to continue to wear blazers in high things, and I just wonder why the schools are not looking at the practical side of things. Some of it seems very easy to resolve, and it's just about human, sort of comfort, really. And it's not a radical change. It's just that actually, let's look at the practicalities of the temperatures that we're working with. And I hope that the schools listen and think actually there are things that we can do that are just very quick and easy to resolve. Some of them I appreciate are going to be larger issues. In terms of thinking about the uniform, the relaxing of uniform because of the concerns that may be raised about standards, etc. But some of it is just, as you say, about pure comfort, and I thank you for raising those issues and continue to raise it.
I don't think I have any other questions. What I was thinking was, well, first of all, I think Stoke Town are doing lots of things right, because they've produced you and you've come here to our scrutiny committee and spoken to us also eloquently. And I think once the letter has gone out to schools and we start gathering responses, if you were happy, we could bring, I mean, I'll come back to this scrutiny committee, but we can bring them to a youth parliament meeting as well, so that we can discuss them with you and your fellow youth cabinet members. And I think the recommendation here is for us to note the report and to thank you and all of the young people that have worked really hard to put that together. And just underlining what people are saying, I think it's really important to know that this is something that started in youth parliament, which then you discuss with councillors, who then brought it to full council, which has then had a motion which has been passed, from which actions flow. So, I think it's a real testament to how Youth Parliament can inform what we do as a council. And I think that's really important. It's not a tick box exercise. It's not a bit of fun, in inverted commas. I mean, I hope it is fun, but it's important in informing some policies and debates that we're having in council. So huge thank you, and thank you very much for giving us your time this morning, Scarlett, and thank you, Jenny. Now we're going to move on to item 6, which is Education and Children's Social Care Policy Brief, and I'm going to hand over to Sarah Gooding, Policy and Intelligence Advisor, to present this item to the committee. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the policy brief just gives a roundup of all the government announcements around education and children's social care since the last scrutiny session. It's been a very quiet time for announcements, so it's quite a short one this time. But just one update from me since the paper was published is that it's been announced this week that the schools bill won't be going ahead in this parliamentary period, although the government have said that they will take forward some of the proposals within it that don't require additional legislation, but the actual bill itself won't be progressing. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Sarah or for Councillor Carlisle? Councillor Tippett.
My question is on exams heading back to normality in 2023. I don't know who'll be the correct person to put the question to. So I'll take the advice on that one from you, Chair. It says about protecting students against the disruption that we've seen in recent years due to the pandemic. So is there any information on how prepared schools feel they are for the return to normal exams, and is there anything else that you would think as answering the question that you think schools might actually need to make sure that they can have students best prepared they can to tackle what is a very difficult set of exams?
Thank you. So I think we're going to go to Jim.
Thank you. In terms of the announcement around exams heading back to normality, what I can say is that the relevant exam boards and Ofqual are consulting with head teachers in schools at the moment, and that's the key mechanism, it's the key listening mechanism really for understanding that the pressures that schools can feel under, particularly around changes to exam systems due to the pandemic. They've gone from teacher assessed grades back to an exam system again. And also that is also an opportunity for them to feed back about how students and families feel. So that will be the key mechanism there. But it would be interesting just thinking about the feedback we've had from Youth Parliament as to whether we can take feedback about how young people feel, particularly in the run-up to exams post-COVID, in terms of their mental health and well-being. So I think there could certainly be some work there for us to do as a council.
You got a follow-up?
No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you. I just wanted to look at the policy regarding children's development in the early years. I note that it says 180 million is being set aside to improve development in the early years. I just wondered how much of that was coming to Plymouth. So that's my first sort of part.
Yes, thank you. We're really engaged with this programme in Plymouth, and we are delighted to be welcoming investment into the city to support the early years sector and to support families and children as well, particularly in some of our key goals around early language development, which we know has been particularly impacted by the pandemic. So in terms of the early maths, language and social development training, we've got 53 settings in Plymouth which have met the criteria to take part in that. So that's really positive, and we've got 17 practitioners and 15 settings have benefited from completing phase 1 of the early professional development. So again, positive there. In terms of the national rollout of the Expert Mentors programme, we've been allocated as a city 4 places per term, and there's 3 cohorts per year, so 1 per term. And we've got 4 settings within the city that are currently benefiting from the programme. So I'm pleased to offer that update there. In terms of the National Professional Qualification for Early Years Leadership, again, that's another really exciting development for us as a city, because we've partnered up with SWIFT, which is the regional training and development organisation, and our council officers are working in partnership with leading practitioners to run this programme, and we are currently training a cohort of 24 practitioners, and that's 16 of those from Plymouth. So that's really positive. And again, just within that, we are delighted that Plymouth is going to be having a stronger practice hub. And that's going to be led through Plymouth Bridge Nursery and Daycare and Ham Drive Nursery School and Daycare. And we've also partnered as well with the Cabin and Becky's Tiny Teddies, who's one of our excellent childcare providers. There is an expectation that the Stronger Practice Network works across the region, so that's not only benefiting from the good practice in Plymouth, but it gives Plymouth a good chance to draw on really good practice in other areas as well. And part of the first wave of that exciting work is the trauma-informed training, which we'll be rolling out to all settings. And in all, that will bring into Plymouth settings and early years regionally about £2 million.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you want to come back, Natalie?
Yes, please. Thank you. So that's really, really good to know. You say 4 settings, and obviously you mentioned Ham Drive, a couple of the nurseries, and obviously the cabin. So how much involvement is there in the voluntary and community sector and in the private nursery sector for these?
In terms of the hub, they will all benefit from the hub. It will be a centre. It will be a centre of excellence in the city and the region. So the training the hub is all about training, signposting, and excellent practice. And it will be a place where all of our early years providers can go to receive that support. Hence the level of funding. So it is something that will benefit everybody.
Thank you. It just seems like it comes round in circles, because in about 2008, the Graduate Leadership Programme was all about bringing sort of our grassroots and giving them qualifications. So I'm pleased to see that it's coming back in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Brasdell.
Thank you. I was having a read of the interim report around the quality of T-level courses. And obviously Stoke Ward is home to City College, which started offering these as an option. The report makes clear that nationally there have been a few issues with that particular qualification. And so I was wondering what dialogue has occurred with City College to find out whether they've faced some of those challenges. One of the challenges that's mentioned nationally is on the 45-day work experience aspect of it, and issues with establishing corporate business partners. So I was wondering whether, if that's something that City College have faced, whether there's a role for the council with wider partnership working to kind of think about businesses that might be able to offer more high quality placements. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think we'll take that away, because Tina Brinkworth, I think you may have met Tina, our skills lead. I know she is in engagement. I don't think we'll have the detailed answer, but we can absolutely get that, and point noted, we'll get it to you as soon as we can within the capacity we've got.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the policy brief? Councillor Creswell.
I was just going to add a little bit, just make an observation about the dropping of the education bill. It does, it doesn't really say anything very positive about attitudes as far as school children education is concerned, and that being a priority. I know there's cost of living crisis, but we know that education is so key to raising standards, expectations, and opportunities for all of our young people. I'd like to endorse what you've just said about the 180 million to improve children's development in early years. I wondered if you could also add, because the same question I was going to ask, which was about the 24 million to boost children's literacy, how much that is going to impact as far as Plymouth is concerned. And one other thing I just wanted to ask about, just how this comes out as an observation, is, which I really very much support, is about reading being taught explicitly even in secondary schools. I think that's actually really, really important, especially if you start to think about young people and having higher order literacy, reading skills, in order to be able to support themselves in other academic subjects. Thank you.
Jim, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'll start the response before handing to my colleague Lucinda. I just wanted to link that point about the explicit teaching of reading in secondary schools to the place-based plan, and one of the focuses in the place-based plan being particularly the raising of the basic standard, which is grade 5 and above in English and maths and English. And I know that in our secondary schools we have some extremely exciting programmes, particularly revolving around reading, the importance of reading daily, but within that, reading for meaning and developing those higher order skills, prediction, inference, and I know that is embedded into our place-based plan, which we'll come on to. Lucinda, would you mind making a comment on?
Yes, thanks. Basically, I would just second what Jim has said, but also just to add a little bit about reading. The place-based plan is really important because it combines primary phase and secondary phase, so schools working together, and there's a lot of focus within that plan on transition. So we've got great strengths within our primary phase in the teaching of both early reading, phonics, and then across Key Stage 2, the teaching of reading with those deeper skills that Jim mentioned. But the place-based plan will really focus on transition, so hopefully we will combat that very historic and typical dip that we see in Year 7, where children's progress starts to plateau and maybe doesn't recover. And we'll be looking to address that. In terms of the government announcement of the bumper 24 million to boost children's literacy, we've got work already well underway in Plymouth with Plymouth Teaching Schools Alliance, working with the Southwest Hub, which commissions Swift again to deliver lots of training, and this is something we could come back to and report more fully on because it's in its early days, but we should be seeing links with all English subject leaders in every school, primary and secondary, working closely to share best practice, to develop their skills to take back in school. So it's all about transition and not losing those gains in Year 7 and 8. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just on that point, I was a Plymouth lead educator as part of the Plymouth Teaching School Alliance, and at that point, this was a couple of years ago, some really interesting work around trying to encourage schools to share good practice on that, but particularly on that dip in Year 7. My wife is still a primary teacher, and she would sometimes see some of the work that Year 7s were doing and think, actually, we're getting Year 5s to really push far greater than that. And so, yeah, any work to try and link primary and secondary together, I think is so important and valuable. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Cresswell, you're welcome to come back.
I just want to reiterate everything that's said, coming from my background of being a primary school teacher, and that I think this is a really big issue about perhaps sometimes secondary school teachers seeing that children have come and they do have those very good skills in many cases at the end of Year 6, but they need to continue to work on those and develop those because they have more and more sophisticated demands being made on them, and reading is so key to virtually every single area of the curriculum. And I think this is actually a really, really positive move forward, and perhaps encouraging secondary school teachers to realise the importance, particularly that daily reading, the daily class reader, all of those kinds of things within school, and looking also perhaps as well when we look at the performance of boys and boys reading and boys level as far as literacy is concerned, the impact that is as far as their progress and their attainment.
Yes, Lucinda.
Exactly. Just something to add. Recently, we did some work, the council did some work with Plymouth Teaching Schools Alliance at the request of the Child Poverty Action Group, and that was around bringing schools together to explore ways of developing parental literacy, particularly for parents with English as an additional language or parents in areas of high social and economic deprivation. We had a really powerful response, and we have around 15 schools that are going to take that forward. So we're seeing a lot of energy in this area, both across primary and secondary. It's quite exciting and it's positive.
sorry, several of us were actually on the child poverty action group, working group, as you know, and I think that joined up thinking and you see that joined up work actually happening is really important, and it's something that really should be celebrated.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. It was just going back to Councillor Brydale's point about T levels and City College and the difficulty with placements, etc. I don't know if any work's being done or any conversations with the University of Plymouth, who have a mentoring programme for their students, and part of that is about looking at placements for them. So, you know, sort of getting on the back of that, because if they're offering placements to their university standards, then potentially those employers are also open to having sort of students at T level as well.
I think that's something we can ask Tina Brinkworth to include in her update to us. Do you not think, Sharon? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I've got one question then to you, Councillor Tippett, and then I think we need to end this one. Councillor Carlin, I just wondered your thoughts on the deprioritisation of the bill. I get that there are, you know, things around cost of living, etc., but the conversation around how it all feeds into child poverty, etc., it feels to me like a real deprioritisation of children and young people. And I know how passionate you are about children and young people, and I just think it's massively disappointing. I wondered what your take on it was.
Thank you, Chair. I echo what you said. When I heard about it, that it was coming through this way, I want to look into it a bit more and see, because I know they've said that they're going to prioritise home education or children who are out of education, getting them in, and they're going to prioritise SEND. But for me, I want to see how that actually looks and how that's going to translate for us as Plymouth.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tippett.
I wasn't anticipating the University of Plymouth to come into discussions today, and just to be fully transparent, I am a student at the University of Plymouth.
Thank you. So I think we are done with that item. Thank you very much. And we're going to move on then to item 7, which is Plymouth Education Board, and I'm going to hand over to Councillor Carlile to introduce that report. Thank you, Councillor Carlile.
Thank you, Chair. This short paper is just going to outline the structure of the PEB, and it's going to be Jim and Sharon will take you through this paper and there to answer any questions for you afterwards.
Thank you. Who's going to start, Jim or Sharon?
I'll go very quickly. I'll take it that the paper's read, and then I'm going to hand over to my trusty lieutenants and team down the way to take any questions. I'm happy to answer anything from a strategic point of view.
So this is quite a brief paper, and the purpose of this paper is to clarify how the Education Partnership governance works across the city, both at a phase level, which you can see is the middle green bar, and also at a cross-cutting level, which is the bottom more dark green bar. And that's really important because we do have, as Lucinda's already touched on, really key work happening in both our secondary phase and our primary phase, and across our special schools and with our AP. But against that, we have a number of boards, such as our SEND Strategic Board and our Inclusion Board, which then works across all of those phases. So in each of those structures, we need to consider the impact on our key themes, such as SEND, on each of those phases. And really, this structure allows us to do that. And then we have that overall governance by the Plymouth Education Board. What you'll also see in the paper is our key themes and key activities for the year, and then a forward agenda item, which is through January, March to July, setting out really that we're looking at SEND improvement in January, which will be in line with our preparations for our local area inspection. And then we're looking at March, the key focus there is the AP transformation, particularly looking at how we can support schools to really upskill in supporting young people who may be in danger of either suspension or permanent exclusion. Before in July, as you'll see, it's the Inclusion Board, which looks at really how we bring all of those issues together. I mean, I can give a really good example of work from the Inclusion Board, which is the trauma-informed training, which we've rolled out across all schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Councillor Creswell.
Can I just ask, this is fairly straightforward, just do we have a list of the, you know, or could we have a list of the actual individual people who are actually on that board and the areas that they actually represent, a little bit like you would in the old days of like a governing body.
Yeah, absolutely. There's terms of reference and obviously attendees will get those to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Harrison.
Thanks. Just a typo, presumably, possibly, on the initial page. It talks about Ming on there again. Is that
Sorry,
right?
that's because Ming. It was originally we had an original meeting when Ming was originally going to be here, and the time's moved on.
Thank you. So that will be changed, obviously, presumably at some point rather than carrying on. Yeah. The other point was just regarding the governance. There's one section in the cross-cutting that is in very, very light type. Is that on purpose, or is there a reason? I mean, I can read what it says
That's,
just about, but
I would say that was a legacy issue, which we will correct.
that's lovely. Thank you.
Are there any other questions on this item? No. I should have said on the previous item that we talked about exam readiness and getting back to normal, and it was suggested that maybe we talk to Youth Parliament and ask them to do a bit of work around this survey or something like that. So if we could note that as an action to take forward. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've finished with item 7. We're now going to move on to item 8, which is the inclusion briefing, children missing out on education. And I think I'm going to hand over to Councillor Carlisle to introduce this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this next paper outlines the current profile of children accessing education in Plymouth. I know as lead member that the team and schools are working really hard to address the number of key issues or to improve education engagement for most of our vulnerable children. Jim and Isabel are going to take you through this paper, but I would like to reference a real clarity of focus around the attendance and absenteeism, that's not coming out of my mouth very easy, is it? Levels in the city. And we need to improve these for each phase, which we know. So engagement and attainment for our children with SEND support in the city, those children on and young people on reduced timetables, and of course our children in care outcomes. So if I can pass over to Jim and Isabel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before I hand over to Isabel, who will take you through the paper in a bit more detail, I just wanted it to be noted that this paper does deal with some of the really challenging themes in the city, and much of this is reflected nationally as well. And I just wanted to assure you that these themes are captured within our place-based plan in the inclusion strand.
Thank you, Jim. So you'll have seen from the paper that of our successes, we've seen a slight reduction in the prevalence of children missing out on education at secondary, and also and the number of children missing out on education with SEND support has remained stable. In respect of our reduced timetables, we know that children and young people with SEND, as they progress through the different key stages in primary school, they become less likely to need or require the support of a reduced timetable. Then that is reflected again at secondary as they get through key stage 3, and then to key stage 4 we see a slight drop in the numbers of children on reduced timetables who have SEND support. We saw an improvement of 36.7% in the numbers of children reported as children missing education, so that was quite a significant drop for us. And we're working with families to support children onto the role of a school as quickly as we possibly can. So that's contributed quite significantly towards that. And the numbers of children withdrawn to home education who are known to children's social care fell by nearly 9% between the 1st of April and the 1st of October this year compared to the last academic year. And that's, I believe, as a result of our new multidisciplinary working arrangements. So that's been really positive. So our most pressing issues are the overall increase in the numbers of children missing out on education. The numbers at primary, those with EHCPs and those at risk of exclusion have increased. And many of our children missing out on education are known to children's social care. So we're working with schools to support plans in respect of these children and young people, and also working together as an integrated children's services team to begin to unpick that and understand that better. We know that as each key stage increases, whilst there might be a reduction, you know, as children go through secondary or go through primary for children with SEND, the duration of reduced timetables increases as children get older. So we do recognise that that is an area that we need to prioritise. We're particularly interested in those reduced timetables that go on for 8 weeks or more. And we are working with schools in respect of their plans for these children and as part of our assurance activity in this area of work. The numbers of statutory school-age children being deregistered from schools to be electively home educated continues to increase, and we are really worried about that, and it is a priority for the city. So whilst there's been a decrease in those known to children's social care, those with SEND continue to rise, but we're working again across children's services with trusts and schools to ensure that home education is a positive choice for families, but we know that there is work to be done there. We're seeing an increase in the number of school attendance orders being issued. School attendance orders are there to support children who are missing from education back into school. So we're expecting to see a continued rise in the numbers of orders being issued. So we do know our strengths and weaknesses, and we're working in partnership with schools through the place-based plan. We're also working in partnership with Dorset and our Link DFE attendance advisor. The DFE has published new attendance guidance, which I'm quite excited about, and I think we're quite excited about in children's services. It sets out and it makes attendance everybody's business. So it talks about engaging, all of us working together to ensure that we're working with families and supporting children to remove barriers to attendance. And as a result of the new guidance, we are working hard to develop an attendance strategy, and that will be in place by the end of December. So I think that it's a really exciting time to be in Plymouth. Inclusion is at the heart of our development plans, and we're integrating our thinking with early help services and also the new locality structure which is being developed. Our plans are based on the analysis of data. Like I say, we do know our areas of strength and our areas of weakness, and we're very much building that into our development plans as we go forward.
Thank you, Isabel. Sharon, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Isabel. It was just to add, we are and have been absolutely relentless in understanding our data, and we're in a really exciting phase in the sense that we're nearly at the position where we have information sharing agreements in place with all schools in the city, which means that we can share our data across the city to understand relative performance issues, etc. That's really going to help our schools when they're working in their cluster arrangements, but really identify, from a positive point of view, those schools that are working really well and have a strong performance, but also for those that perhaps have issues, how can we learn back to the place-based planning approach in terms of that peer support? We have absolutely supported that process, and the work that's certainly taken place since I've arrived is about really following the child's journey through the organisation, and making sure that we have that team around the child and not repetitive conversations. So the locality work that Isabel's alluded to is a redesign of our structures, and that means that our teams will be working more closely together. The perhaps historic divide between education services and social care services will be addressed through that, and it means that we will have very real dynamic conversations around children. More importantly, moreover, we will be looking at the data now that we have it to identify how can we support sooner and earlier. What are the thematic issues, perhaps in a community or in a cluster of schools, in an academy trust, for example, or in a particular school? How can we support? We know that by listening to head teachers, I've had a number of sessions with them since I've joined, that early help is something we need to do more of and be better at. So we will be introducing in January a pre-book early helpline. So rather than waiting to get through to the gateway to get a response, early help shouldn't be immediate. It can be something you can plan for. So you will be able to, or practitioners and stakeholders in the community will be able to book a slot to have a conversation for early help. They can do that around a free lesson time, for example. It takes the stress out of the system. What it absolutely means is that when we have that conversation, the practitioners that will be taking that call can identify, who do we signpost to? Is it to a member in Isabel's team? Is it to a member to our early help team? And that will be an immediate step change for our system in Plymouth, and I'm very excited about it. We have soft launched it, so you won't know about it because we're just trialling quietly behind us the systems. I think you know from previous presentations how important I understand data to be in terms of understanding evidence and profile. The beauty of what we're about to launch is that every contact has I know Plymouth loves a form, but it has a form, and that form's really important because on the back of those forms we'll be able to understand themes, issues, quantity, quality, and we will be able to really embed that into what more do we need to do for schools, for localities and individual children. So I think this paper sets out, we know the things we need to do. We as a council will absolutely be relentless in our drive and improving these areas of attainment and engagement, but also our city place-based approach is fundamental in delivering that and working together. Just one more point, I did speak to an academy chief exec earlier this week, just around touch base as the plans have developed to make sure that they're working for us all as stakeholders and custodians. And the feedback was this is absolutely in the right direction and we have the commitment and engagement of our partners to do that. Finally, all of our plans have been shared at a high level stage with the DFE, and I'll pick that up when we get to the regional commissioner or regional director item.
Thank you. I know Councillor Cree and then Councillor Tibbs have got a question, but I wondered if I could just ask something. Are there any patterns emerging? Are there any you've said you're really understanding the data now, whether there are any particular settings, I'm not asking you to name individuals in here obviously, any particular settings or MATs which have a higher prevalence of deregistering or children missing out, or is it shared fairly evenly across the city in different schools and multi-academy trusts, etc.?
I think we're at the stage where we have the data and we can see figures, but obviously, as we all know, figures tell us one thing, then there's the discussion around it, and that's what we need to do as a partnership. So we can see through the development of the data, there are nuances. We can absolutely see it at an individual school perspective. I think where we are now, Jemima, is by the time we get to February, I think we'll be in that position where we can clearly see that. Jim, you might want to add something.
Yeah, I would just add actually that one of the advantages of the data-driven approach is that we see patterns very much based on the needs in the areas of the city, and that will allow us to line up our resources really to support the need where it is in the right place at the right time. And just as Sharon mentioned, the conversations that she's had with the CEO of a multi-academy trust, you know, my team then work with the directors of that trust, the inclusion directors, with my equivalent in children's social care. So we then meet with the trust and then we start to plan, what do you see in your school? What can we do to support? How can we work together to really improve things and have a really sharp focus on children and families? So I think that approach is already yielding some real successes and really speaks to the data that Isabel went through, that we are addressing those issues within the city and we do have a partnership approach.
I wonder if I could ask then if, when you've got that data by February, whether we could have a report that kind of gives us a bit more granular detail. It's not for us to know which trusts, etc., but just talking about areas of deprivation and all the other things that you've raised. I think that would be interesting for us as a committee to see when you've kind of drilled down into that data a bit more, to come back with a kind of more in-depth report, if that would be okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Councillor Cree and then Councillor Tippett.
I have 3 questions, if that's okay. Sorry. First of all, table 1.1, which is looking at SEND support EHCP. One of the things that I hear a lot from my residents is that they believe their child should have an EHCP and they're in the waiting to get one. So I can foresee that there is a particularly vulnerable group here of young people who need support but aren't getting it yet. Have we got a plan in place for how we're going to support what I see as a really big group of people who don't have that EHCP yet?
So yes, and I can positively report that our performance has significantly improved since June of this year. I haven't got the exact percentages, but I know there's a timeline for an EHCP, 6-week first decision, 20 weeks for plan being produced. We have historically had a waiting list as you've described. I will check the figures, but I now know our 6 weeks figures in the region of around 80%. So that's actually statistically and nationally a very strong performance. We will be relentless in getting that to 100%. I think one of the challenges, and it links back to early help in the city, is not all of the children who think, and families that think they need an EHCP do. And what we need to do is absolutely work in that early engaged way to say, a plan isn't the only mechanism to get support and get the child tailored support that you need. And back to my previous conversation, early help teams and the SEND teams will be working closely together, because often sometimes it's the support for parents as well as it is for the children, and colleagues that work and have worked in the system are nodding at that. So so I think, Councillor Cree, it's really positive. Our profile has improved, and I can absolutely get that, and we'll get it attached to the minutes. In terms of what more are we doing, by September of this year, we had created a SEND improvement plan that looks at the system of SEND across our city and identify the things that, again, we need to do more and better of. So thinking about specialist school placements, our sufficiency, how do we meet needs? And it absolutely links back to the conversation that Jim's just had around inclusion, because we need to do more in our mainstream and work with our settings and our schools, as Jim's alluded to help support those to stay in mainstream. Not every, as you know, every young person needs to be in a specialist provision. So there is a SEND improvement plan. We have an absolute focus on our timeliness. It is significantly improving. What I would say to you for clarity and transparency, though, is because the demand has increased, the capacity, for example, of educational psychologists hasn't necessarily, and there are budgetary implications to be able to meet that demand. So we are very focused on that, looking at our processes and also making sure that where we can, we align all the activities to make the best use of our available resource. So an improved picture, and I'll get the figures to you.
Thank you. Next question. Table 1.3, but just broadly. Given Dame Rachel D'Souza's comments earlier in the year about how she believes that most local authorities have weakness in their data about the children missing from education, part one is, how confident are we that these numbers are accurate? And what are we doing to identify children that we don't know about, to make sure that they're not vulnerable or being put in a position where they're not safe? Thank you.
Okay, I think it's important to note that electively home educated children works very well for some, and not all of those children will be at risk. So I will pass to Isabel, because I know there's a very detailed piece of work around our EHE children, electively home educated children. So in terms of the data, she can answer that question. In terms of managing risk, as we've said, we are absolutely looking at our data and identifying those that are known to social care, because they potentially will be those that may have other risk characteristics. So again, through our new way of working, we are absolutely sharing that data across the system so that we can be clear about that. Jim and the team are beginning to work much closer with our social care colleagues, so it's front of mind in terms of what are the additional questions you might need to ask. And that includes the process that we would consider at the point an EHE occurred. Equally, working in partnership again, it's really important, isn't it, that we work with our schools to make sure that we're not encouraging that when actually school place would be better. And again, it's that working in a triad in partnership. But I will pass to Isabel in terms of the work that you did prior, I think some time ago, around EHE and the analysis of that.
Thank you. Can I just clarify that you're referencing table 1.3 initially?
Yeah, but just generally, how confident we are with our numbers.
So if I start with the table 1.3 in respect of children missing education, we're fairly confident in our numbers. We do capture all the live birth data. It comes through to our education system. And from that point onwards, we are tracking children. So first of all, through early years, and then once they become statutory school age, we're monitoring to see that they are registered at a school, or if not, then we make inquiries to establish what it is that what education is being provided. Other authorities have a similar system, so if children move into the area, then they will notify us so that we can track them until a successful resolution. So we're very fortunate we have a team of officers that will go out and knock on the doors and try to locate children and work across a multi-agency. We also have information sharing agreements with the UK Border Force, with health, so we can try to track children if they leave the city and go to another country, or indeed if they we can find out if their families, where families are claiming child benefits, so on and so forth. So we're tracking children in a variety of different ways across the country to make sure that we are satisfied that they've left the city and that we know where they're going, and it's the same when they come into the city. So although I would never want to say that this is 100%. We're fairly confident in our systems. We have really well-established systems. We were one of the first authorities to implement the Ofsted recommendations in respect of children missing education back in 2013. So we've kind of had quite a long time to really build on all of our processes to make them as good as they possibly can be for this particular cohort of children and young people. In respect of elective home education, there has been a lot of work that's gone on in with regard to home education, particularly following the we had a rapid review, and there was a great deal of work that went on with the Plymouth Safeguarding Children's Partnership and across different organisations to make sure that we are all taking responsibility and keeping oversight of children who might be moving out of school into home education. We undertake a lot of checks, rag rate children when they go to home education, so that we're really aware of their vulnerabilities, so that we're kind of prioritising how we work with respect to particular families. And then we work swiftly if we become aware that a child is missing education, to support the families to apply for a new school place and to find and to get them back into school. So we've been working really hard with our education colleagues in schools across primary and secondary to make sure that places are available for those children, so that they move from being children missing education back into school as quickly as possible. And we are, like I say, we're always working on our processes with children's social care, with health and with other colleagues to make sure we know as much as we possibly can about these children, so that we are assured that we are taking the right steps to support them.
Question 3.
Thank you. Sorry, just a comment before I move on to the next one. This comes from a position of I was a school refuser who was ultimately supported by Plymouth City Council to stay in school. So that's why I'm so interested. It's not coming from an overly critical place. Third question, very much more specific and much more on a kind of a very sensitive nature, really. So I've been dealing with some casework for an adult in this position in the city, but it made me wonder whether we have a system in place for children or young people who report that they think they might be at risk of a forced marriage, and if there's something that swings into place immediately to support them. Very specific and very sensitive, obviously, but a concern for me.
Yeah, that's a safeguarding issue, and it would be immediately dealt with and managed through our safeguarding procedures. So yes, and you would expect that up and down the country, and many local authorities, we experience it from time to time, not often, but yes, it would absolutely, safeguarding processes would support that individual.
Thank you, everyone.
Councillor Tippett.
My questions come up from the information that Sharon was giving us on the new early help pathways, and I'm acutely aware that it is used too late too often as a pathway to get help for vulnerable young people. So I was just wondering if there's anything being done to give relevant, responsible adults in all settings the confidence to reach out to these services and not see them as an inflammatory step, but actually in a step that's supporting the child.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right in terms of getting early help right, so it's seen as an enabler and a supportive thing rather than something that provides risk or stigma. Our trauma-informed approach, but children-centred approach, is about having that dialogue. The use of language is so important, isn't it, in terms of how can we help you, what is worrying you, and having that relationship, having that conversation, and the whole process of our relaunch around that early help discussion is to do exactly that. So we're not having those conversations when we have heightened risk, and then the kind of the challenge of, but if social workers get involved, what does that mean for me and my family? We have tremendous strengths in the city, and as I think I've alluded to before, significant resource in that space. It's just making sure that the messaging around it is absolutely spot on, so it's not something to be feared. Excitingly, we have a bid into Department for Education for 3.3 million around our Family Hubs programme, and that's absolutely about working at the early, with our little ones in the city, and really engaging in that early intervention. So more to do, as I keep on saying, but absolutely in our focus and an area of focused development for us.
Thank you. And I've got a question, and then Tom, and then Natalie, and then we'll finish this section. My question was just a data one, really, around table 1.3, where we talk about the top 3 reasons. I just wondered if we knew how many children we've got resident in Plymouth who are waiting to be admitted to a school, what's the longest they've waited, and what's the average time they wait.
So we do have that data. It's obviously not available today, but I'm happy to report that into the next group meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Brysdale.
Quite a specific question about page 40. So the list of criteria of concern that is used to identify children that the panel will monitor. My experience of a few different schools in Plymouth is that sometimes external suspensions are done quite carefully, and increasingly I've seen a prevalence of internal isolations. Actually, it touches upon what we were discussing earlier with school uniforms. So, thinking about some of the bullet points, such as the second one, any pupil known to children's social care who have had 3 or more suspensions in a 6-month period, that could potentially be quite a high benchmark if a child known to social care was suspended twice, for instance, but was then every single week being put in an internal isolation for a kind of escalating pattern of behaviour. And so 6 months for that child might not trigger within this criteria. And, with those individuals being, central to our social care system, I was just wondering, it's a tricky balance, because obviously you're not going to want thousands of students to suddenly become eligible for this, but the decisions that led into that particular criteria. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So in undertaking some of the work and thinking about our development plans, I have been looking across the country really at other authorities which are good or outstanding, and kind of taking the learning from them. So many authorities that are good or outstanding have these types of panels in place for tracking. At the moment, this is just a proposal, and we're working through it and need to kind of really agree across our children's services how this might look and how this might work. But I do take that as really relevant feedback into this process. We have kind of multi-layered approach at the moment going on, in terms of our thinking. So we're piloting a way of working with multi-academy trusts to look at their data around children who are being suspended, numbers of children being withdrawn to elective home education, to have those conversations at a kind of quite strategic level with the trust. And then because of the new attendance guidance, every single school will have an allocated officer, and they will also have to have targeting support meetings once a term. And that will provide a really great opportunity for us to be able to go into the school and use their data around their severely absent cohort, their persistently absent cohort, but also to start asking, to be really curious about things like children with social workers who might be repeatedly going into isolation and so on and so forth. So because we are really focused and committed on those outcomes for our vulnerable learners, so our children with SEND support, children with EHCPs and children with social workers, so it's a really key area of focus. But at the moment we're just kind of thinking about what the format of those meetings might need to look like, and the most appropriate officers from the local authority to be there, because it may be that there needs to be some support from an education, from education psychology, so on and so forth. So at the moment it's, we're working through how the structure and piloting different ways of working so that we can, be a learning city and make sure that we're not only taking the learning from other authorities, but we're also piloting things and trying things out so that it works for us within our new plans and our vision for the city.
Could I just come in on that? So that sounds really interesting. And that's an agreement you've got across the board, is it, that you can have these meetings? You can go into school and have these meetings?
So it's actually set out within the DfE's new attendance guidance. So received royal assent, and it's expected to go to become statutory at the earliest in September 2023, but we, as a local authority and schools, wherever possible, we are supposed to be working in this way and moving towards that model, hence the attendance strategy, but also my team are going out and already meeting with every school and beginning to start to slowly introduce some of these conversations, so it's work we're already undertaking.
That's really encouraging, so there hopefully shouldn't be any resistance to any of that. Sorry, Sharon, you wanted to come in?
Just to add, so you can see things are moving and shifting, but it's the data is one thing, and as you've pointed out, it can tell a different story, can't it? It can look like one thing and then turn out to be something uniquely else. So the locality model is around that, the relationships around the child, who has the relationship, who's the lead, for want of a better expression, officer worker in that space, because you might look at a set of data that says, actually, this looks like we should be doing something. You get a context and say, no, this is absolutely fine. It's well held, it's well managed, and the young person is supported. Equally, you could have others that actually may not be to your attention, but a conversation around that. So in the locality model, it will also be based around what we know about the children, what we know about settings. So outside of the automated reports that will drive some of our lines of inquiry, there will be a cultural approach which is child-centred and picks up on the richness that exists in our soft data that you don't just get from the facts and figures, just to reassure you. And that will be our way of being and our way of working together across the system in partnership.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up? Was it you, Councillor Tippett? Was one other person, Councillor Harrison, apologies. I haven't got my vice chair to nudge me, so.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I'm just going to pick up back on what Sandra has just said, and that's reassuring, because my question was about, where children are being withdrawn, the reasons why they're being withdrawn for, to elective home education, issues with school. Sometimes that can be, yes, it's the family have got an issue with school, but is the work being done to actually address and look at, actually, is it an issue with the school? Particularly and having those conversations about whether or not it's parental choice, or whether actually there is something going on with the school or particular cohorts in the school. So that work's being done as part of those conversations you're having.
Absolutely. And then just for clarity, obviously we will in other spheres of education, maybe through complaints processes. And it's always understanding, is it, where is the issue? And sometimes it is around that relationship, but we would absolutely be looking at the conversation that's happening and making sure that we've got all an understanding of the dynamics at play, because as I've said, sometimes aren't always what they first appear to be. But my officers are more than attuned to that and are working through that.
Thank you. So I don't think we have any more questions. So the committee is happy to note the report with the action that you're going to bring back a more granular report around that data to the next meeting. I'm proposing, we haven't got a break built in here, but I'm proposing just a break for 10 minutes and then try and make the time up, because actually for once we're on time. So if we come back at 12:30 to start with item 9, and then hopefully make up that 10 minutes as we go through the rest. Moving on now to item 9. And I'm going to hand over to Councillor Carlisle to introduce this report, which is Plymouth Education Improvement. Thank you, Councillor Carlisle, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is Jim and the team. They're going to be discussing the paper to show the progress that we've actually made in Plymouth, working across all the sectors, but we're also identifying the priorities and goals for improvement across the system, and this is working through our place-based approach. So over to Jim and the team.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this paper provides an overview of the place-based model in Plymouth, and we've touched on it already this morning. It is a hugely exciting piece of work because it really galvanises education partners, that's us, that's Multi-Academy Trust, as well as partners in other sectors such as early years. And I will talk to you a bit about some of the involvement of higher education as well. So it is a really, really innovative piece of work. The place-based work began with a really sharp focus on the secondary sector, particularly secondary outcomes, because that was seen as a priority when the project first started. But now we're into the second phase. We've moved into primary, as mentioned, special and early years, and we are really using the platforms of the board structure that you saw in the previous paper to drive that work forward, to really improve outcomes for children and families in Plymouth. A key element of the approach is the one plan for Plymouth. And the plan that is in the paper, or described in the paper, sits alongside the improvement plans held by us as a council, and also through our partners, Multi-Academy Trust, early years providers, primary schools. It's not there to duplicate, it's to set out our joint priorities. And just to run through the priorities set out in the paper, we've got system infrastructure, which really speaks to how we govern our way forward as a city with our partners, and obviously our place-based plan is key to that. Leadership, so that's in terms of leadership development, to ensure that we have strong leaders in the city and that those leaders have the training opportunities and access to the resources they need to move forward, and that's led by one of our trusts in the city. We have curriculum, and within that is English and the English and Maths strands, which we've already touched on as well as we discussed earlier papers. But particularly that's around the leadership of curriculum and the development of curriculum as a way really to raise standards in schools. And again, that's led by one of our trusts. We've got a focus on teaching and learning, and that's through the hub model with the teaching school. So that's bringing together our practitioners so the best practice in schools can be shared amongst all schools. And the fifth area, or the fifth strand, is inclusion, which is a key area for the city, which we're all aware of, particularly following Isabel's paper, which preceded, which was before this one, and looking particularly there at alternative provision, how we develop that in the city to support schools with how they support young people in schools who may have particular barriers to education and attendance, and as well looking at mobility, which is the number of children in and out of schools, to ensure that our school population is stable and that young people are in school and able to learn. And of course, underpinning that inclusion strand is the inclusion scorecard, which is a really exciting and innovative piece of work in the city, which we are in the test and development phase at the moment.
Thank you. So, have questions? So, Councillor Cree.
Only one this time. It's a very, very specific question. Priority 3, goal 3, looking at extending the school day to provide a wider curriculum. I didn't really understand what wider curriculum meant, and then what the kind of the equality impact assessment of that is, because obviously there are going to be some children that are not able to attend school for longer. Yes, mostly just what wider curriculum means specifically, and then how that's going to impact some of our young people.
Happy to make any further clarifications as part of the minutes, but my understanding is that that wider curriculum offer is quite often around the character curriculum, so it will be opportunities for young people to engage in activities that they perhaps wouldn't normally experience. And you'll know from the Ofsted framework that the character curriculum is really important now in giving young people a chance to develop their interests and themselves, and we've already had a really great example from our youth parliament here today.
Thank you.
Could I also ask, we had a bit of a discussion about this before we came in this morning, can you outline what place-based means for people who don't understand that terminology?
Yes, place-based is a term which recognises the needs of a particular place, so Plymouth being the place, and the fact that we're unique from any other places. So our place-based approach is very much focused on our needs as a city, and it's not something that is dropped on us, imposed on us, or given to us as a set of pre-existing priorities. It's what we develop as a partnership.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this report? No, thank you. So if the committee's happy, then we note the report, and we'll move on to agenda item 10, which is school attainment. and I'm going to hand over to Councillor Carlisle to introduce that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper provides an overview of the attainment of our children and young people, and it is really good to see the improvements and successes that have been outlined in this paper, but of course we need to be relentless in our focus to make sure that we improve and do more for it. It is lovely to see the improvement in Key Stage 4 though, and the outcomes in Attainment 8 and Progress 8. So it's going to be back to Jim and Lucinda again to take you through the rest of them now.
Thank you. I've got my glasses out. I'm just going to ask Lucinda to start with the Key Stage 2, which is the primary data.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, there's an update on the attainment data that you've got in front of you on page 53 of the pack, because that was based on very early unvalidated data. So in actual fact, children in Plymouth and at end of Key Stage 2, the combined average of children achieving the expected standard in reading, writing and maths was 65%. That's 1% above the national average, which is good. That's a first for us to get above national. And we're also 2% above the South West regional average. If we break that down, 74% of children achieved expected standard in English reading, 70% in writing, and 71% in maths. Now, these are really good averages, particularly when we consider that this set of data comes after a 2-year hiatus caused by the COVID pandemic, and schools are still in the process of delivering a lot of COVID recovery to make gains against lost learning. We saw the lower outcome, the lower result in English writing at the end of Key Stage 2. Still 70% was not bad, but that's lower than reading. And we know that nationally, children at both Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, the greatest loss of learning caused by COVID was in English writing, because it was very hard for teachers working online and remotely to teach children those subtle skills of writing independently at length, and also for children to maintain their writing resilience so they were able to produce enough writing. We've identified the need to recover successes in English writing as part of the place-based plan. So that plan at primary phase, we've got work around writing, and particularly writing amongst boys and writing at Key Stage 1, which historically in Plymouth are our areas of weakness. But overall, our end of Key Stage 2 data, our primary data, is pretty successful, and I personally feel very pleased with that, and I think it reflects the good work that our teachers across the city have done over the last 2 years.
Thank you, Lucinda. In terms of Key Stage 4, it's a similar picture in terms of the provisional data you have in the report in the pack has now been updated. But I do have to just emphasise that we are still on provisional data, and that final data won't be published until January. And I also just need to mention as well that because of the COVID disruption, we don't have comparative data year on year. So the update that I'm able to bring to you today is first of all that the Key Stage 4 results are there for celebration. They offer significant movement from where we were previously. And I can add to that through some of the work done through the place-based evaluation so far, that 67% of our secondary schools have improved their Progress 8 score, 87% have improved their Attainment 8 score, 88% have seen an improvement in their basics, so that's their English and maths. So we have seen some real steps forward. And in terms of just what that data now looks like, in terms of achievement of grade 5 or better in English and maths, which is one of our place-based focuses, Plymouth stands at 45.9%, national at 49.8%. So although we are below, we are closing that gap rapidly. In terms of Progress 8, there is a slight variance in the figure, but we stand at -0.2, national 0.03. And that's against our figure of minus 0.29 in 2019, which is the last comparison point. So that's significant. Attainment 8, 47.5 versus a national of 48.8. So again, improvement there and an improvement on 2019. And staying in education or entering employment, 94%, and that's in line with national. So we have had some significant movement in our results for young people this year. And again, there will be that final data in January, so happy to provide a further report.
Thank you, Jim. So do we have questions of Councillor Cresswell and then Councillor Tippett?
Yes, I suppose I probably would like to have seen, and I don't know if that data is available, but some of the other things, some of the other nuances and such. For example, in Key Stage 1, in Key Stage 2, looking at those specifically those groups, how do we compare when it comes to exceeding expectation? Because we're talking about aspiration, which is quite key to some of the work that we've been doing with the Child Poverty Working Group. And I'd also be curious as well to know about certain groups, how they perform, how SEND children are performing, the boys versus girls, pupil premium, Key Stage 5, children who are in forces families. I don't know if there's data available as far as the phonics screening is concerned, and Key Stage 2, Year 2 assessment. And the other thing I did want to raise, because although there's a lot to be celebrated as far as as we're concerned looking at Progress 8, what I do find still a concern is at Key Stage 4, it's the percentage of children having, and if you look at the performance scorecard, we are still below not just the regional and national average in terms of English and maths at level 5+, but we're also below our statistical neighbours as well, which I do think gives an indication, although we have some very positives there, I think when you start to dig deeper into the data, it's important to look specifically at the performance in English and maths at Key Stage 4, because English and maths are so absolutely key and critical to future success.
Thank you. If I pick up the first part of your question there. So in January, when the Department for Education will publish the final validated data, I'd be very happy to come back and report on all of those disadvantaged groups, and also report on Key Stage 1, end of Key Stage 1 attainment and Year 1 phonics. DFE are a month behind where they normally would be with this, but that's something that we can definitely action.
I would echo that for Key Stage 4 as well. When the data's finalised, we'll be able to report on the same. I mean, one of the big steps forward that we had this year, which again is worth celebrating, is that we had a data sharing agreement with schools, so we were able to share the provisional data. One of the downsides of the provisional data is it keeps changing, and you can't drill down into it because you know you're probably just going to cause yourself more problems as it changes. So we will come back with that, and we'll be delighted to do so. In terms of the basics, absolutely agree with the point you've made. I think that the celebration is how rapidly we're closing the gap, but the key point is that there is still a gap. But I'm certainly assured through working across the city that schools and our place-based lead, Anna Mills, is very, very focused on continuing to work with schools to close that gap further and not to lose focus on how rapidly we need to do it, because as you say, it is so important. So happy to provide updates on that progress as and when required.
Yeah, I'd be really happy on that. I'd really like to, it'd be good to drill down further into the data when we've got it more clearer and it's actually, the final data. And I think the other thing to say is that what you're saying has been a lot of sharing, in fact, with schools, and I think that that's really important, because this shouldn't be seen in any way to be being critical, or it should be an opportunity to be able to sort of like drill down and think, where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses, in order that we can actually perform and get better. So yes, very, very very keen to looking more detail at the data when we have all of the finally confirmed data in the next meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Tippett.
Thank you, Chair. My question follows on from Councillor Creswell's about having the data available, and I was specifically interested in the higher and lower areas of social deprivation and having that data available. And so to follow on, my question is, what sort of support would you be implementing for particular schools of concern? And I'm not saying this as a critical question. I'm speaking as someone who went to the worst school in the town that I grew up in the year that I did my GCSEs, with just 44% of students achieving both their English and maths, and the 3 other GCSEs to get the 5. So what sort of stuff is available for those schools to make sure that students from lower class backgrounds aren't being left behind?
I'll pick this up, and Jim might add to it. So this is one area of this place-based plan working that we can be really positive but also really hopeful about. We have got an attainment gap in the city. We have got lots of schools that serve very disadvantaged communities, as we know. And once our data is finalised, we've already started to do this with our early data, although we shouldn't really share at this moment. But once the data is finalised, we can look at attainment and progress in particular schools and particular localities in the city, and we can identify where there is high deprivation, low attainment, and then through the place-based plan, so our colleague Anna Mills, who is leading that, she'll be able to speak to CEOs of trusts and head teachers of maintained schools and find out from them what additional support they need. Also, in addition to that, we do challenge our schools as well as supporting them, and we meet regularly, we have regular conversations with schools and school leaders, so we can see where children whose deprivation gap is the greatest are not being supported to make the greatest progress. So it's a combination of challenge and support, and through this plan that we keep referring to, we've got a really good structure in place there to make this very real work, you know. Yeah.
One of the key strategies nationally is pupil premium, which is there to support disadvantaged young people. So we work all the time with schools on pupil premium strategy and understanding how they use that. And you may have heard of the Education Endowment Fund, which regularly publish strategies which work really well to support children to catch up, particularly in English and maths. And again, we do have a link from the Education Endowment Fund, Lauren Randall, who sits on our place-based working parties and then is able to feed directly into the place-based plan. And I think that's another advantage of the place-based plan through the strand number 1, really, which is the system infrastructure, is that we are connected to all of those national organisations such as NASON, which hold one of the key strategies for school improvement for young people and children with special educational needs, to ensure that we benefit from that in Plymouth.
Thank you. Have you got a follow-up, Councillor Tippett? No. Okay. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very quick one. Excuse my ignorance. Obviously, I'm aware of the basics, but the attainment and 8 and progress 8. Can you clarify what you mean by that, please?
Yes, certainly. Now, it may or may not be helpful, but below the tables there's 2 sort of starry definitions which you might want to return to once I've done my best as well. So hopefully between what's written there and what I can say, that will help. Attainment 8 is taking the achievement of a pupil across 8 qualifications, including maths and English, and then they add to that various mathematical formulas to weight it, and then there's the English baccalaureate subjects as well, which is humanities and a language, and they basically attribute points to those, and then a pupil achieves a point score, and then they average it for the school. And it's very much the same for Progress 8. They look at the point using Key Stage 2 results at which a pupil reached secondary school, and they take that as the first point, and then they measure it against the final point and calculate a progress score. So the national progress score is 0. So your school is either going to sit as a plus, which means that pupils are doing better than expected against the grades that they would be predicted against their prior attainment, or a minus if they're not quite doing as well as expected against their prior attainment. Does that help? It is quite, you kind of hold it in your head and it seems okay, but you think about something else, you've forgotten it again.
Thank you. Have we got any other questions on this item? So much as I'm loath to kind of populate our next agenda with things from this meeting, I think it is really important that we see that validated data around disadvantaged groups. Because for me, and I know for other people on this committee, I mean, that's kind of the absolute heart of what we're trying to make sure happens for our most disadvantaged young people. So we'll note the report and ask for that, if that data is available by February, that can come to us. Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Excuse me. Now we're moving on to item 11, which is a verbal update from Sharon about the Regional Schools Commissioner. Thank you.
Hi, just wanted to say it's great to hear the celebration, isn't it, of achievements for our young people in the city before we move on. So the Regional Schools Commissioner has a new title, the Regional Director, and there's been a change in the Department for Education which has brought together, pretty much as we've been describing locally really, social care and education, and obviously it being in separate places, and making sure we have one link with the Department for Education where they look at and again, think about the place, they look at the place of Plymouth, so what's happening educationally through our social care and early help lens. So we have regular conversations. In fact, we were due to have one this week, but that's been slightly delayed. So they have been to see me and the team, and will be joining us back in January. Key on the agenda are many of the things that we've actually talked about today, in terms of really focusing on our children who are either vulnerable learners or known to social care. So they continue to work with us. They are aware of the improvement work we're doing. I think it was Isabel earlier referenced that we've been working with Dorset Council, who are our good Children's Social Services Authority, Ofsted Good. And they've been in looking at and working with us, benchmarking in terms of areas of improvement. So we meet on a normally termly basis. They also then have a dedicated education lead and a dedicated social care lead. Myself and the team will then meet with them again, normally once a term, to go through our performance data, such as the data we're about to go through in a second. And so our next appointment with them will be in January. And again, I'm more than happy just to give an update in terms of the areas of content. My first meeting was very much about understanding Plymouth, understanding the context, and starting to talk about the improvement work that we've identified today.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions, Councillor Creswell?
Out of interest, does the Regional Schools Director actually come and speak at any point to this committee, or could they be invited to come along? Because I know in the past, some years ago, what was then the Regional Schools Commissioner actually came and spoke to the Scrutiny Committee.
I can certainly ask the question.
I was going to ask if we could extend an invitation. I don't know whether
that's basically it, extending an invitation.
Whether she has, it's still Hannah yet, so I don't know whether she has visited any of the scrutiny committees, but I don't see any harm in inviting her, because I think it would be really interesting to hear her perspective, especially given what we've just had around, you know, we had that very clear goal around our attainment, and yes, there's still things to do, but the rapidity of it is interesting and impressive, and I think it would be interesting for her to come and speak to us about her, you know, where she sees where we are now and how we're going to get where we really need to be. So I wonder if we could take that as an action to invite her to attend scrutiny, and we'd love to see her. But obviously it's entirely at her discretion whether she takes us up on that invitation. So if there's no other questions on that, we note the update and move on to item 12, which is the performance scorecard. And I think, hello, Paul. We've got Paul Stevens. Is Hannah online not today? Okay. So we've got Jane Anstis and Sharon. Are you going to introduce. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so very much looking at data today, aren't we? So again, I'll take it that the paper is read. It gives you an overview of what I think is forming a positive profile of change in Plymouth. So we can see, I've just pulled out some key areas. I'm just mindful, does Charlotte want to say anything?
Councillor Carlisle, did you want to come in?
Sorry, before I steal her thunder.
No, that's absolutely fine. I was going to say something, but I think, Sharon, you might be saying roughly the same things as me, because I was just going to highlight the fact that the referrals to children, young people and family services are down 30% this year, which I think is really, really good. And I think the fact that our children on child protection plan has dropped significantly as well is two highlights I'd like to bring forward.
Thank you. I apologise because it wasn't on my notes that you were going to introduce. I wasn't not giving you the opportunity.
Don't worry. No slight was taken from me.
Thank you for that. Okay, back to you, Sharon.
Okay, so the paper gives you some progress on key areas in our children's services. Obviously, we have an exhaustive data set, as you found out this morning. So referrals, which are social care referrals, have declined, which is a positive thing because we statistically had more than perhaps we should have had compared to others of a similar profile. We have seen our child protection plans reduce significantly, but also we do see correspondingly an increase in repeat child protection plans. So we're keeping a very close eye on that, but sometimes it can be to do with small numbers and large sibling groups, so it can drive the percentage. So it's really important that we look at the dynamics of what's happening there. Again, we're working with our improvement partner in Dorset just to make sure that we've got that sort of critical friend overview there. In terms of our children in care numbers, you'll know that our children in care increased quite significantly over the COVID period. I'm pleased to report that that has stabilised now. I think I've mentioned before at previous committees, or that Jean did, that we, again, compared to other similar areas, have more children in care. We're now back in line with our statistical neighbours. However, we do know that we at this point in time, and certainly in the recent past, have taken more adolescents into care than our statistical neighbours. So we're absolutely looking at that. And again, we can talk about that when we get onto the budget scenario. However, the information you have shows a positive direction of travel for some of our key indicators. Linking and aligning to education, though, we know we absolutely need to do more about our level of need in the city. We are not anywhere near where I think any of us would want us to be in terms of young people who are not in employment, education or training. To that end, we have we have a number of strategies being developed. We have an attendance strategy, a neglect strategy being developed. These are all areas of improvement. And we also have a strategy to focus on education, employment and education, employment and training for our young people in the city. That is currently being written. It's being written as a partnership strategy. So again, it will absolutely link into the place-based approach to make sure we're connected with that. But nonetheless, we need to do more for that cohort of young people, really understand what has happened in their education journey and how we can make a difference in that space. And that includes, again, I know Jane mentioned it earlier, a forensic and clear focus and aspiration for our children in care, because, again, too many of our care leavers are not currently in employment, education and training. So I'll leave you to, I'm sure, the set of questions you have for us. Could I just introduce Jane? I'm not sure, some of you may have met Jane, but Jane is our new Service Director for Children, Young People and Families. Really delighted that she's joined our organisation, and also would want to celebrate that she's come through the ranks in Plymouth. So really important in terms of career pathways for our staff. So Jane, I don't know if you want to add anything, and then we'll move to questions.
Thanks, Sharon. No, just to say good afternoon. I think I probably have had contact with most on the call, but yeah, but in a different role. So it's good to be here, albeit in the guts and thrust of a really great opportunity for us for inspection. So if I am a little bit distracted at some point, it will be only in response to that, and I'll let you know. But thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. And yes, congratulations on your role, Jane. It's great to see you in place and getting on with it. Paul, I don't know if you wanted to add anything before we started questions.
Just very quickly, just to add what Sharon was saying about the referrals, another good news is that the level of repeat referrals is also coming down month on month at the minute, so that's a good thing to note. And also, since we last saw you and looked at this document, we've actually added some definitions of the measures in the back, including the key stage 4 and the attainment. Because I think Hannah said you need to be Einstein to understand attainment, but we've put some very, high level definitions in there in case you've got any queries on those. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see we've got a couple of questions already. I just wanted to ask something about the numbers going down. What can you describe what you attribute that to? Is there some element of, I don't know, pandemic-induced risk aversion, or what? Can you just kind of explain it to us? Or Jane, yeah.
Excuse me, sorry. Councillor Lang, do you mind repeating the question to me? Thank you.
I'm just, the data's good and interesting and positive. I think it's interesting for us to have the narrative around how you think that's happening. And I wondered if there was any element of risk aversion that you were sort of moving away from, and if it was anything to do with the pandemic where people were a little bit more risk averse. Was it anything to do with that, or if you can describe why what's happening is happening? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, isn't it? So in many areas nationally, there is a similar trend. It's not universal though, so I think there are some particularities around our situation in Plymouth. I don't think we've fully understood that phenomena, but certainly as we've, because in other areas, for example, those increases have been seen at a slightly different time point. So it is interesting for us, but we have changed quite significantly our approach around moving to a more restorative way of working alongside and working collaboratively with families. That's a journey we're still on, but certainly I know under Jean's tenure that work and that approach had begun, and it's quite a similar time frame. So I think our approach to our work at the front door and generally is changing and improving. In terms of risk aversion, I think that still is a challenge for us, and it's difficult for me to comment on that the culture pandemic because I joined in April 2020. But certainly at that time, I think we had again some work to do around doing the right work in a deep enough and sustained way at that early stage. So I think some of those things you see are the results of us needing to do more in the early help space and more in the early stages of our work to prevent those later admissions in care. So some of those will be very suitable and appropriate interventions, but an improved approach earlier on could have prevented that in the longer term, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And do you mind just, again, for us, we're lay people, we don't know about social work. Well, I'm speaking for myself, but when you talk about working restoratively and collaboratively to prevent further escalation, can you just give me an example of, an actual thing that you do to stop things escalating, if that makes sense? I'm just interested in just a narrative example of something that how you work that stops that.
Yeah, so I think from a sort of a social work approach, yes, but also from an ethics and values point of view, working restoratively is about really developing and deepening our relationships with families and working alongside them. So we're on the same side of the table, working shoulder to shoulder, to really understand what the needs and issues are for that family and to really build their ability to understand and to be seen as experts in their own challenges. So to build their understanding, to build their strengths, to look at all of the assets. So those people in the family and in the network around that family that might really offer some helpful solutions and benefits, and how we really build on strength and really build on asset, both in the family and around it, as opposed to, so I guess the alternative way of working might be to come in with our professional expertise and have a backpack of determined solutions that we think would work and to lay those on top of a family. So it's about a deeper, more relationship-based way of understanding and working with families as opposed to doing things to them or for them.
Thank you. Councillor Tippett and then Councillor Cree.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is about the care experienced young people in employment, education and training, and looking at the data, seeing that currently only half of our care experienced young people aged 18 to 20 are actually in our EET. I was wondering if it was, I've got two questions by the way, Chair, sorry. Firstly, if it was possible to compare this to 18 to 20-year-old data of those who aren't care experienced, because it'd be really interesting to see whether this is a specific issue for care experienced young people or whether there could be another factor involved, like the COVID-19 pandemic.
So first of all, yes, the data is available and we can get that to you and share that. I think the reality is it's not to do with the pandemic. That won't have helped, but I think it's more deeply entrenched issue than that, and it can also be directly related to the number of children who are placed outside of the city of Plymouth, who then maybe haven't had education outside of the city or come back to the city, and then it's finding that appropriate place. So it's a multifaceted issue, but nonetheless, it's one that we are, and Jim looks after the virtual school as well. It's one that we're absolutely understanding and working alongside with Tina Brinkworth in terms of those opportunities. There's some fantastic initiatives we can't bring here today that we're working on, but again, the theme of the meeting really is really understanding the who and the why, because there isn't a universal answer here. Some of it's about we need to increase our placements efficiency, so more of our children in care stay in the city because we can better look after their education. When they're out of the city, it's subject to another local authority and we lose some aspect of control. So again, that place-based strategy. So yes, too, we can give you the data, but also the strategy sort of looks at the drivers as to why this happened, but it isn't uniquely to the pandemic.
Jim, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything from a virtual school perspective.
Yes, we do work really closely with our young people, and we've got two colleagues who are specifically tasked to look at the transition from school into post-16. And I, just to echo what Sharon said, the pandemic certainly didn't help, but the reasons around why young people don't end up in education, employment or training often again bounce back down into what we've been talking about today. It is about making sure that young people do develop the skills they need to get the qualifications they need to open up the pathways. So in particular, we know that Key Stage 2 writing is a issue for looked after children. And then we know as well that they perform significantly worse in terms of the attainments of the basics. And what we look to do there is to ensure that pupil premium money through the PEP is appropriately targeted to meet individual needs. So that's something we've got a really sharp focus on in terms of how we have a direct impact into ensuring that more young people transition on into college, to university, to employment, to training, whatever it is they wish to do. That raising out of aspirations and that ensuring that they have every opportunity to close those gaps is key.
Thank you. Councillor Carlisle, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Yeah, I think we know that I bang on and on and on about the Care Leavers Covenant, and this is something that we're hoping will help them as well. If we can get enough businesses to sign up to give them first interviews, apprenticeships, work experience, that sort of variety of thing. Because I'm with same with Councillor Tippett. It is a worrying statistic massively to have half of them in care leavers. So it'd be quite good to be able to push more people and more businesses towards Care Leavers Covenant and get more help for our children in Plymouth.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you, Councillor Carlisle. Councillor Tippett, you had another question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I've also, about the worry about half the not being in education, employment or training. It's known, especially without that parental support or support from families, it's much easier for the wheels to fall off the wagon for young people. And so to have some sort of structure in place for them is fantastic. My second question was going to be about the strategies, etc., but I understand you can't bring that today. So if it's possible to hear about anything in an email outside of the meeting, I'd be really, really interested to hear about what's going on.
Thank you. Councillor Cree?
I wasn't sure whether this was better for this section or the next section, but and it's a bit of a broad, vague question, I'm sorry. One of the suggested ways that we can tackle the budget deficit is that talking about working to keep children in their home and not being placed into care. I'm not an expert on what that means, so I would be really interested to see what your thoughts are on how that plays out on our performance scorecard, particularly looking at managing risk. And as I said, this is coming from a position of not really knowing that much about it. So thank you.
Okay, I think it has a number of angles. So the first is effective early help will mean that some of our young people that have come into care will not need to do that. There are, and we can better support at home. Some of it's linked to, Jane's just had to leave for front of the matter, I'm afraid. Some of it's also linked to our restorative work. So if we work restoratively with how can we help you, what you know, the things I've said earlier, how can we help you, how can we work with you, really work in partnership with parents and families, but also where perhaps it isn't appropriate for that young person to stay at home for, you know, there can be a myriad reasons why that's not appropriate. Really working with the community and the network around that young person and saying who might best support you and help you in order to prevent an entrance into care. So there's some work we can do around that. And certainly since I've arrived in Plymouth, for our adolescents, I've referred to earlier, we statistically take more into care than others. I've had a real clear look at our young people that have joined us and tried to understand their journey to that place. That has shown that there are things I think we can do in that early help restorative space. And again, the role of schools is really important in that, and the role of education and that the role of community. So again, we are looking at what we can do in that space. There are also some young people that do need to come into care. I'm talking particularly around adolescents because that's one of our key drivers. In our other age profiles, we're kind of where you would expect to be given our demography, etc. There are also things we can do when it is appropriate for a young person to come into care, but they may not need to stay into care long term. And that's where, again, that restorative work, the really meaningful practice with our young people about returning home and when best to do that and how to do that safely. So to that end, we have identified a cohort of young people that we believe in terms of their needs, that we should be and must be working with their families or connected carers to return them back to a home setting and to their community. And as you've pointed out, Councillor Crete, it's directly linked to the budget, but moreover, it's the right thing to do for that young person. So we're absolutely looking at that. We would hope to see, and I talked about our children care numbers stabilising, that work will keep that position. There are clearly, as you know, we had an increase during the COVID period. Some of those young people will need to stay with us now because it's the right thing given where they are, and we'll just have to work with, you know, carry those young people through the system as we should as a responsible corporate parent. But a lot of it's around what we can do differently earlier on in the system. But those that can, should, and want to go home, we will absolutely support.
Thank you.
Have you got any follow-up? No? Councillor Creswell.
This is a sort of like general one, actually probably with my corporate parent hat on really. And so it's looking at education, employment and training. And what we have constantly going on and we're being told about is this wonderful advantage of the free port and its opportunities as far as Plymouth is concerned and such. And thinking of myself as a corporate parent, how are our children going to benefit from that? And particularly looking at, I know that City College is one of the partners and such, you know, how do we make sure, as you would do if you're a parent, and making sure that your child got the opportunity to do some work experience with perhaps a friend who you've got those links with. That's kind of almost what we're looking at. What are the opportunities there? Not just these sort of very large, very successful companies or whatever, but opportunities for our children to actually get some sort of quality training and opportunity to actually gain economically from us having a free port in the city.
Yeah, it's we have a number of boards around that space. So the Care Covenant is the lever to do that in terms of really thinking about the place of Plymouth and the responsibilities that we all have for all of our young people actually, but specifically in this case our children care. So that conversation has happened through the Employment and Skills Board, and indeed I had a conversation with the Chamber of Commerce just recently just about how do we create the appetite and the energy to provide those opportunities, and thinking about how we do that as early as possible. it's also absolutely the case for our children with and young people with SEND as well. So those conversations have started to happen, and when you see the strategy, you'll see there's an absolute link around. And we ourselves, as an employer as well, how can we do that? We have some numbers, but they're very low. So again, we will get the strategy when it's ready for you. But one of the beauties of our children's services in the Plymouth City structure is that the participation and skills adult agenda is in the Children's Services Directorate, and that means we can really think about at year 9, what can we be doing? How do we set aspirations? And I have had a conversation, obviously, with Jackie Grubb at the City College in terms of how we can work together in order to do that and what does that look like across our piece. But more than happy to bring that back. But those conversations have definitely happened, and the covenant is our opportunity to promote that. I'm desperately, Jane's had to leave this, but there's I can't think, Charlotte, can you remember the name of the card that we've got, the silver card for the care leavers? I can't think of it. There's
I can picture it, but I don't know what they've actually called it.
Particular initiative that I'll provide some details on, that's also looking about how businesses support our care leavers, but I just can't think the name of it, but I'll get that to you as well. Slightly.
But sorry, apologies. You guys would have all seen it on the full council. So it was when you went over to sign up for the Care Leavers Covenant or do a pledge, they were actually on the table there for you to see.
So it's not necessarily employment linked, but it's about our businesses recognising care leaver status and providing support for them through discount, etc.
I think it's right to point out, I mean, I mentioned care leavers, but right to point out that opportunity, you know, if there's going to be this wonderful opportunity of Freeport within the city, then how are our young people actually going to benefit from it? You know, and I think that's really important, and we need to keep that keep pushing that from children's services and such through to other committees, other parts of the council as well. Thank you.
Could I ask a question about, it's good to see that the percentage of pupils attending Plymouth schools judged as good or outstanding is increasing. I just wondered, do we know, because as I understand it, our preferred option obviously for our looked after children would be that they attend a good or outstanding school. Do we have a percentage of how many of our looked after children are attending good or outstanding schools?
Yes, we do. We do have that data. I don't have it with me today, but that can be provided.
Thank you, because I think it would just be a useful comparison to the whole cohort to see if it's in line with that.
Can I just make a point on that? We do look at that. One of the considerations being child-centred is sometimes it might be when a child comes into care, they're in a school that's not good or outstanding, but the relationships and network that they have in the school is the right thing for them to stay there. So we obviously look at it, but again, a little like earlier, sometimes we need to look at the individual circumstances. It is obviously a consideration for us as we move through the PEPs, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, and I'd just be interested to compare it. And of course, I take into account context and nuance, and it's all the more reason to keep driving our improvement across the board, so that, you know, whoever you are attending a good or outstanding school in the city. Have we got any more questions on this, Councillor Harrison?
It's not a question, it's just to add to that. Can we add in the information about early year settings, not just statutory school?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So I think, no? Okay. Thank you very much. So thank you, Paul. I think you let off relatively lightly. So now we're going to move on to item 13, which is financial monitoring report, month 7. And before I hand over to David Northey, who is our Section 151 officer, to present the report to the committee, I'm just letting you know that the Performance, Finance and Customer Focus Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is chaired by Councillor Penberthy, referred some areas of consideration to this committee, which included mitigation and weaknesses surrounding partner income, £500,000 identified, action plan to reduce agency spend, housing pressures and what was being done to ensure housing is provided, bespoke arrangements, homeschool transport, the action plan for the Red Rag performance rating associated with children with multiple child protection plans. So I'm going to hand over to you now, David, to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've probably covered the main points, haven't you? In the report, you've got the overall council report for month 7, which gives you the context really of where we find ourselves, and members will be aware that when we first started reporting for this year, we were talking about an overspend across the whole council of 15 plus million pounds. So the fact that by month 7 we've got that down to 4.1 is a major achievement, but I know what you'll want to concentrate on is what that means in terms of the Children's Directorate. In table 2 in section B, you've got the directorates shown in detail, and you've got the children's there, which is showing the net variance and the contribution to that 4.1 of 2.217. And probably the best thing to do, Chair, is then go down to the last table in that report, which says actually for children's, the gross overspend is 4.401, and then you've got, as you've just mentioned, mitigations of 2.204 million, which is how we get into that 2.217. So I can go into the detail of where does that 4.4 come from. I mean, basically it's 1.8 million from placements and additional costs, and I'm sure Sharon can cover those off for you. There's also just over £1 million of what we're calling non-placement costs, but everything is related, of course, including pressures within legal costs. Those have gone up exponentially since the pandemic, and that's having an impact on this year's budget. And then within education, participation and skills, there's a couple of specific areas. And then we've got the mitigations, and I think you've picked out the main ones to be thinking about at the committee today, but those do add up to 2204, which gives you that net position, Chair.
Thank you, David. Sharon, did you want to add anything before we start questions?
Yeah, so I think David's alluded to, so there are two key thrusts for the pressure really. One is the pressure on the children in care placements budget. We have a plan to reduce that where we possibly can, but we are a demand-led service, so if children need to come into care, they will come into care. If children's needs are complex, their care package will be a significant amount. The pressure on the budget this year is linked to a small number, too small to name here, of very high cost placements with children with either complex disabilities or specific needs that mean that we need to procure a certain type of package. All of those young people we look at on a weekly basis. There is a panel to make sure we're doing the right thing, to look at placement availability. I think I've mentioned before at this meeting that for every one children's placement in the country, sorry, there are 100 other local authorities or children looking for that placement. So there's a real acute pressure on the system. So the pressure on the budget is a small cohort. We know who they are. We need to do the right thing as a corporate parent, but we also have undertaken a piece of work, looking at, again, what's happened to that point. So if some of these children were our children who have multiple placement moves in a year, what could we have done differently? And we have a learning piece review there. So pressure on that placements budget, but a additional focus on that now in terms of how we support that. And back to Councillor Cree's comment earlier, that includes identifying a cohort of young people who we can and should be returning home, and that will release some pressure. But we need to do that appropriately, and it takes the time it takes to do it well and to make sure that they then stay home. The other main pressure, as David's alluded to, are in the education budget, and that's linked to school transport. So this is transport for our children with special education needs. We have a similar amount of routes, we have a similar amount of children. It changes every September, as you can imagine. But the pressures we're seeing there are similar to those that are in the Place Directorate. They're linked to the cost of fuel and they're linked to the providers. So it's not that there's more of them and we're covering more miles. Actually, year on year, it's more or less the same. But it is the case that a number of providers have chosen to walk away from the contract. New providers are charging much more, and the last time I looked, which was a month or so ago, that ranged from 12.5% more to 50% more. So that's driving the significant pressure in the budget. It's not a volume issue, it's a market issue in the same way that energy is affecting place. The other area that has the pressure is a statutory function, that is a short breaks function. So this is for our children with disabilities where they have met a threshold where they should have by law access to short breaks or respite activity. Again, quite often we're talking about our most complex children with disabilities, not always, but there are, so it's a relatively small cohort, and we are looking at what we can do differently. Can we commission different packages? But it's again a demand-led part of the service, and those children's needs need to be met. There is a regular and absolute focus on our budget, and we will continue to focus on that. And as we move through our practice and practice improvement work, as our children care numbers reduce, as our early help grips, as we've talked about earlier today, we should see, as other areas have, other good local authorities have, Ofsted good, we'll see a reduction in some of these areas' budget, but the education send budget, transport, is a marketplace dynamic. Clearly, if some of the external costs go down, we would wish, hope to see that in that cost profile. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview.
Thank you. Talking about marketplace dynamic, I mean, that's the same, with placements. And I think, we can do everything we can do at a local level to try and mitigate the costs of placements. But you've just described the pressure on, particular placements, 100 local authorities bidding for one placement. And I think it's why, not necessarily that the white paper would solve this, but this is why I want to send a letter from Plymouth around the Josh McAllister report and the recommendations and the money that he's asking for, because there are solutions in there to some of this, hopefully. And it isn't something that we are going to, I've said this a million times, and it's like a broken record really, but we are not going to solve this at Plymouth level. We're not. That market is broken around children's social care placements, and we need government action, because if we could get that sorted and sort the budgetary issues, there's more than we as a council could do to help people with the cost of living and all the other things we want to do as a council. So Councillor Cree has got a question.
Kind of following on from you, Councillor Lang, it's for Councillor Carlisle really. Given the budget concerns and then linking it with the risk register, where we're still red rag rated of failure to meet our statutory duties, I think we'd all like some reassurance really at the specific actions that you're taking in budget conversations, cabinet conversations, so that you are really putting our children and young people really front and centre and defending them. So if you could reassure us of that, I think with your specific actions, that would be really, really great.
Thank you, Councillor Cree. The reassurance is that there has been already a lot of in-house mitigation that's going to be put in place to start reducing the pressure. As Sharon has said, the pressure costs are coming from protecting our children as best as we possibly can, and the costs of things like agencies going up, and that's what we're having to incorporate. There's actually not much that's pretty much changed for us. It's just the cost of everything has gone up like it has for everyone else. But Sharon's been working on the data really, really heavily, and she started identifying places that we can in-house mitigation, reduce that pressure. And we've already started seeing that happening. So I can only see that for next year onwards, that will carry on.
Thank you. Do you want to come back?
And in the conversations that you're having with your colleagues, to put this front and centre, because Sharon's already spoken to us at great length about all of the things that her and her team are doing.
Yeah, for myself, I am, and I suppose as Jemima will know, Sharon know, I champion very, very heavily on this, and especially with any budget cuts that might be coming our way. We have pushed back on certain things as well. Sharon has an excellent grasp of the data, which makes a lot of it in some matters that you can't argue with it, which is fantastic. But fundamentally, we always work around the child, and the cabinet know that, and the cabinet are very, very much on board with protecting our children, especially protecting our children in care. It's a really high priority for all of us.
Thank you. David, did you want to come in?
Can I just come in? I mean, it doesn't solve the problem, but just to on that awareness and getting the message out there. I sit on quite a few national panels, and one of my questions every time that I sit in front of DLUC is, it's great that you keep telling us about the stress and the pressures on the adult social care world, but don't forget the children. And that message is always pushed forward by myself. And an example I'll give you is earlier this year, the finance director at DLUC swapped. So the guy moved on to another department, and in came another one. And at his leaving sort of tour of the country, talking to different agencies and whatever, I heard him say 3 times, "I hope David's on the line," because an endearing message that I've taken from my time working with you as a sector is the case that David put on the table about 2 years ago about one particular child coming into care costing 1.5 million in 1 year, and the fact that that was more than a 1% increase on the council tax. So that did resonate, and he did assure me that that message gets passed around wherever that comes up in this conversation. So we are on the national stage, and we do push the plight of the children's and the budgets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, that's reassuring because some of the conversations I've had with people in the last few months, that there's an understanding that at government level the penny seems to be dropping around adult social care, you know, for obvious reasons, ambulances stacking up and all that kind of thing, but it's still not necessarily dropping around children's social care. And you know, everybody in any forum that they can advocate around this, it's really important, because as I say, we can do all sorts of mitigation, but we're not going to solve it without some national approach to this as well. I wondered if I could ask something around the one of the issues that came out of the Performance, Finance and Customer Focus Overview and Scrutiny Committee, where we talked about health colleagues and the mitigation that's badged against those conversations of £500,000 around the ICB's contribution to some of our placements for our Plymouth children. And we talked at that committee about Councillor Carlisle hopefully inserting herself into that conversation to try to expedite some of those conversations, to try and get some of that money, to try and support some of our Plymouth children. So I wondered if you had an update around that issue. Thank you.
Is that to Councillor Carlisle or to myself?
Councillor Carlisle, can you hear me?
I can now. You disappeared off a little bit, Jemima. I think with inserting myself in the conversation, are you talking in reference to when we had the budget?
No, I'm talking about getting the money from the ICB, ICS, CCG, whatever we call it. Sorry, I know. Is it ICB? ICB. That's been badged as a mitigation for some of the in-year pressures, and I just wondered. I raised it at that committee that hopefully you getting involved in those conversations might speed things up a bit about accessing some of that money, or how realistic is it that we've badged £500,000 against those conversations? How advanced are they, and what can you do to speed it up?
And in fairness, I haven't been able to get involved in those conversations, but I will do so, and I'll speak to Mark and I'll speak to David as well.
Okay,
Chair, oh sorry,
no,
Chair, if I might just give a quick update, is that okay?
Of course.
Yeah, so I did say this, I think, last week at the other committee, but I think it's worth repeating for a second. So when we started seeing some pressures within the Children's Directorate, I put forward that I would talk to health colleagues about a contribution, based on the fact that historically we do get a contribution from what used to be, of course, the CCG, and Plymouth City Council had a fantastic relationship with the local CCG, with our Section 75 and all that kind of thing. So it's been a bit of a strange year because they've lost the badge of the CCG. They're now just Devon NHS, and they're working as an integrated care board, as you said. So that's disrupted slightly. Their finance director left the organisation, and a new one has only just come in. So those conversations have been a bit stilted. But I'm taking responsibility at the moment for the fact I put a challenge on the table of £500,000. It was based on the fact that this time last year, and in fact right up until the end of February, we didn't have a contribution from health last year, but we sat down and secured just over 825,000. So I didn't think that 500 was an unreasonable ask. And just to assure you, Chair, and the committee, I do have regular meetings and I do put that one forward as something that we need to try and resolve. And then, so that's in year. And then I think that the next concern would be when I look at the budget for next year, we are looking at a full review of our Section 75 and sort of picking out key areas of joint funding. And certainly on the list of the top 5 was how we work better supporting children's social services. So that's where we are, Chair.
Thank you. And the reason that I'm going on about it, for want of a better description, is because it is included in the budget paper. So I that's why I want that conversation to happen. I'm absolutely mindful of good relationships and all those things, but it's just the realism around whether we can achieve that. And I wonder if, I don't know, Ross, whether you could put your mind to some kind of recommendation around just that we really want those conversations to happen as soon as feasibly possible, and if Councillor Carlisle can do anything to help that happen more quickly. It isn't a criticism, it's just like, you know, the clock is ticking, and if there's £500,000 that we think we could get ultimately to support our children in Plymouth, then we should be doing everything we can to make that happen. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, sorry, Ross.
Oh, through you, Chair. It might just be useful to pick that up at budget scrutiny. Your next meeting, I think, is March. It's the earliest point at which you'll be able to get a report on that conversation. Of course, it will be germane to the next year's budget anyway.
Yeah, I just would like it noted in some way here that we discussed it because it came from Councillor Penberthy's committee. So something acknowledging that, you know, we're concerned about these conversations and we want them to be happening. And I take your point. I think our next scrutiny is in February, actually, I think. Is it?
Yeah.
But, and it, obviously it's going to come up in budget scrutiny. But I don't know, I'll have a think about it while we move on to the next item, but just something from us about, you know, the importance of this. It's quite a significant amount of money, and if we can get that, that will, you know, will help mitigate against the in-year pressures that we're talking about. Councillor Harrison?
Yes, thank you. It's a separate type of question. I just wondered whether or not there's been any strain on the budget from unaccompanied asylum seekers, you know, underage, under 18 asylum seekers, refugees, that sort of thing. Obviously, you hear on the news about different areas with asylum seekers coming into areas, and whether or not we've been affected by that, which then might affect our social care and our education budget.
Not to the volume of other areas. There is a national formula around how many local authorities should receive per 10,000. We're below that. We do have a number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and as care leavers, it is the case that the government funding that we get for that doesn't cover the full cost of delivering services for them. So we're not under the pressure that other local authorities are, but it's absolutely the case that the number that we have and the funding that we get for the number that we have, there is a deficit situation, and that again can be particularly the case if it's a young person with specialist mental health needs, for example, or particular care requirements. So we are below the profile nationally, but yes, it does place a budget strain.
Thank you. I wondered if I could just ask for a quick update around reducing agency spend.
Yeah, we have done a lot of work around that. We do have agency workers in Plymouth, but we don't have it to the volume and quantum that many local authorities have, and I think we should be very proud of that, and it's testament to our stable workforce. So we have a number at the moment of agency workers, and they are predominantly in our children's social work team, so our fostering service, our independent reviewing service, our permanence team, and we have some but we are in the process of recruiting some international social workers to Plymouth. It's been a fantastic piece of work delivered by Jane and Danielle Tweedy, one of our heads of service. And they join us February time. That means we will be releasing some agency workers from that space. The other aspect of work is the development of our recruitment and retention strategy, our grow our own strategy, and we are working through that to identify people who have career aspirations that want to become team managers, and we will work and support those so that we can then replace those. So we do have some, it's not just the quantum and volume, but a little bit like the unaccompanied asylum seeking children that other local authorities face. And in our budget plans for next year, we've made some structural changes around that to reduce the agency numbers. We have our social work academy, and we've looked at who leaves us and when they leave us and why they leave us. Positively, majority of people leaving those teams that I've just talked about leave to work elsewhere in our service. We of course do have some that do leave. We know there is a particular pinch point around newly qualified practitioners and moving on at the 2-year plus stage. So again, Jane and the team have done some diagnostics about what do we need to do, and we've had some staff workshops about how do we ensure that we keep those social workers that we've developed. So I've looked at the forward agenda. There is a recruitment and retention piece planned for the February scrutiny. We will bring that information to you then. But the very good news is we have 15 international social workers joining us this year, this financial year, and they will make a significant impact into that agency number. One final thing to say, where we do have agency staff, it's because we as a local authority decided to invest in our children care team to offer a better service. So where we have that agency need in our children care team, it's because we increased post rather than because people were leaving or staff were leaving.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Correct me if I'm wrong, David. I think at Councillor Pemberley's committee, you agreed that you were going to send each month's finance monitoring report between now and
Yeah.
the end of the municipal year.
The end of the year. Yeah.
We would like to have that in this committee, just be copied into that monthly update on the. Otherwise, we're waiting till the next scrutiny to. Well, budget scrutiny, obviously, but also just a month on month the monitoring report. Would you be able to do that for us, David?
Of course, and I'll also commit, Chair, that at the next meeting you get the full detail that break down each of those numbers rather than me just talking to them.
Thank you. Lovely. Okay. So we're noting the forecast revenue monitoring position at month 7 as set out in this report in the sum of 4.104 million. So now we're moving on to item, thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 14, the risk management monitoring report. And I'm going to hand over to Ross Jago, Head of Governance, Performance and Risk, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Should be fairly brief. Not changes in this report in respect to this committee's responsibility. Some minor changes, some cleansing to the overall risk register. There is 5 red risks currently on the strategic risk register. 1 is pertinent to this committee. It relates to the possible failure to meet statutory duties due to growing volume and complexity of demand for children's social care. I think it's probably fair to say, Chair, that you've covered this both at your last meeting and this meeting during your conversations on the previous items. But for members' information, if you'd like, we'll certainly send out a copy of our risk management strategy, which identifies the Council's corporate approach to risk and its risk appetite. So just reflecting that conversation you had earlier around risk aversion and risk awareness, sets out very clearly our appetite for risk around safeguarding is 0, whereas our risk appetite around service delivery might be a little bit higher, and I think that's reflective in some of the actions that the teams have undertaken. So happy to circulate that as when appropriate, but happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ross. Does anybody have any questions on this item? No? Thank you. Now we're going to move on to tracking decisions. Not going to go through them all. I just wondered if you've read them, whether you have any questions or queries to raise on them. We've talked about the letters from last time round, the one around the McAllister review, and also writing to the Secretary of State for Education for funding for the local government settlement in line with costs of inflation. For me, minute 107, I guess that's on track, but it was just we were asking around the safeguarding partnership, whether an invitation had been extended to faith groups, and we haven't had an update on that yet, but it does put a target here of before the next scrutiny committee in February, so I'm happy with that. Does anybody else have any questions around the tracking decisions? No. So, apologies, Councillor Brasdale.
I was just wondering, I know it didn't come from this committee originally, but because the motion references the Education Scrutiny Committee, whether we could include the school uniform actions on this going ahead so that we can keep close note of that.
Yeah, thank you. We can do that, can't we, Ross? Yeah, great, thank you. Any other issues to raise on this at all? Councillor Carlisle, anything to add? No?
No, nothing from me, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on then to the work programme, which is the final item on today's agenda. Anything anybody would like to start with on the work programme? Creswell.
Just want to look at it. We have had a conversation about some of the data and such, but I think partly we had a discussion that we might actually have it sort of much more fine and granular. So possibly that could be in the next meeting, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Ross, are we able to go through what we've, the actions that we've talked about today? Because I can't read my handwriting.
Through you, Chair, I've got Jake minuting your meeting online, so I'll pick it up with Jake. But certainly, the actions that I've seen throughout that through this session, you've noted all of the reports. We've got the additional recommendation around the conversation with the ICB in terms of the partner contributions. Picking up some recommendations around detail, granularity of reporting, which I can take back and certainly work with Paul and the team on. That's what I've got to take away with me today, Chair. I can certainly get Jake to circulate your recommendations later today or on Monday.
Thank you. Councillor Carlisle, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we should have an update of the new social workers as well, because it'll be like I'm wondering, I can't remember what date they're turning up, but it might be a nice little sort of update as well from Sharon.
Yeah.
If she's happy with that.
Yeah. Thank you. Jake, have you got all our actions and you're happy to provide us with that at some point?
Yes, absolutely. I'll do that today.
Thank you. Councillor Creswell?
We did talk at some point about, and we had quite a successful meeting in which we invited one of the CEOs along from one of the MATs, and we did talk about having a sort of like a kind of like regular, perhaps not every meeting, but a regular item of having one of them along to actually talk to us and have a sort of like fairly open question session. I mean, we've discussed the possibility of having the regional schools director, I think they are now, along. If that wasn't possible, perhaps, excuse me, one of the MAT CEOs might be a possibility.
Yeah.
I think linking back to our conversation, it might be useful to link that back to the Plymouth Education Board and the chairs of the Education Board, because you could get a CEO from a MAT that actually has a broader geographic representation. I think perhaps representation from maybe, you know, the representative from the primary phase or the secondary phase, because they'll be able to give you a more Plymouth rich approach, unless you're looking for a generic overview, in which case
I think that would be perfect. That would be far better. That would be really, and probably easier to do, I would imagine, as well.
Well, might it be sensible to do it in a sequential way? Could we invite the early years? Would that be?
So there's early years strategic board, and then I'd probably do early years and primary together. Actually, be Heidi and Stuart.
Could we invite them?
Yep.
And then, yeah, I think that would be a really good way of doing it. And then, obviously, whoever is scrutiny chair after May might decide they don't want to continue with it. But if they do, then we can invite then the next phase, the person with the responsibility for the next phase from that board. I think that would be really helpful. Yeah. Okay. So we know we've got Kickstart coming back. That's something we asked for in February. Out of hours reshaping and MASH update. I don't know what you think, but yeah. And then we talked, didn't we, about widening how all refugee and asylum seeker children in our city access education.
Yep, it's fine.
Social worker recruitment and retention. Well, I think then, an update around the social workers who are joining us, that fits in with that. Safeguarding partnership update, that goes back to the tracking decision I was talking about. Children and young people's emotional wellbeing. Now, I think we're going to be having am I right, Ross? We're going to be having a select committee on that.
So I think the plan from both yourselves and Councillor Aspinall was to get that many times postponed mental health select committee back up and running. So I imagine that's going to be rolled into that session. I don't have dates at the moment. I'll need to check with the team, Councillor.
Okay, so we won't put that on the work programme in the hope that it's going to be dealt with via a separate select committee. And changes to pupil premium. I don't know who put that on the.
I think we can absorb that.
We can, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think obviously we'll near the time look at the agenda, but I think that's pretty much. I'm just going to go down to the items to be scheduled. I keep thinking I've got a touchscreen laptop and I haven't. Adopt Southwest. When does that report come? Okay, all right. Well, obviously that come whenever it's time.
Report.
Yeah. No. Okay. Finance monitoring. We're covering that off already. Yeah, I think we've pretty much slotted everything in that's on there. So thank you very much. I think. Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. I just want to point out, I agree with Ross that obviously the mental health has been pushed back. If for any reason the select committee just doesn't happen again, are we just going to leave it, or are we going to try and reinsert to make sure that it is on the agenda? Because obviously it is something that's high priority, and we know Youth Parliament are very, very,
Well, I was going to say actually, because Youth Parliament have already done some really good research into this. They've spoken to 600 young people in the city around mental health. And I think their report will really inform that select committee, which I think we're all pushing to happen. But yeah, absolutely, it can't, if it doesn't happen that way, it's got to come here some way. Yeah, absolutely, because it's a really burgeoning issue that I hear about a lot in my casework, and I'm sure the rest of you do as well. Okay, so I think that we've come to the end of the agenda there, and I'm 4 minutes early, which is very unusual. I just think I found that really helpful and really useful, and have a real focus on education in the city. And there's lots of really good stuff to take away. And our thanks go to everybody that's really pushing to make this better for our young people, because I know we all in here really do think that young people are our top priority, and getting them the best education they can have has got to be something that we just continually work to improve for them. So a huge thank you from me, and I'm sure from the committee, to everybody that's working so hard on this agenda. And thank you all for your contributions today. Thank you.